I want you to stop for a moment before anything else begins. Just stop. You are tired, not in the ordinary way, not the kind of tired that a good night of rest can fix. You are tired in the way of someone who has been carrying something real for a very long time, without being able to fully put it into words for anyone around them. Tired in the way of someone who has believed, and kept believing, through seasons where the evidence was not cooperating, and the silence stretched longer than felt right, longer than felt fair, longer than you had expected when the promise first arrived. And recently, in the middle of that tiredness, you did something remarkable. You moved. You acted. You took a step that nobody required of you, that nobody around you may have fully understood, but that something deep inside you had been building toward for a long time. That step, that quiet, costly, unremarked upon step, it did more than you know, more than you can see right now from where you are standing. And it is the entire reason for this message. I am not here to add to what you are already carrying today. I am here to show you something that has already happened. Something set in motion the moment you made that move. Something that I want to give you language for, real language, not borrowed comfort, not religious noise, but actual understanding of what is unfolding around you right now, even in the places you cannot see. Because what is coming for you, chosen one, is not simply a continuation of what has been. What is coming is different in kind, not just in degree, different in kind. And it begins with what you did. Stop for just a moment. Don't scroll forward. Don't move to the next thing yet. I want to ask you something directly. In the last few weeks, maybe the last month or two, did you do something that required more from you than what you had available? Something you did not fully understand, did not have full confidence in, but did anyway because something inside you said it was time? Something that cost you something real. Your peace, your security, your comfort, maybe the approval of someone you cared deeply about. If the answer is yes, then what I am about to tell you matters more than you might be prepared for right now. That action had weight. Not metaphorical weight, not the symbolic kind that sounds nice but disappears when circumstances don't immediately shift. Actual weight. The kind that moves things in places you cannot see, in ways that logic cannot easily track, in a direction that is fully oriented toward your breakthrough. I am not going to tell you everything from here will be easy. I am not going to give you a timeline I don't have. What I am going to do is show you, through principle, through pattern, through the kind of truth that has been playing out since the beginning of recorded human experience, that what you did recently activated something, and what was activated is already in motion, not maybe, not contingent on circumstances cooperating, already in motion. Now, before we go further, I want to say something about what this message is, because I know you have been here before. You have listened to things that promised to help and felt good in the moment, and then faded when Monday came around again. I am not here to give you that. This message is going to take time. And it is going to take time because what I am building toward is not a feeling. It is an understanding. By the time we reach the end of this message, you are going to understand the mechanism, the actual way God responds to a move like yours. You are going to understand the stages that divine release moves through, and you are going to know exactly where you are in that process right now. You are going to walk away with a framework for reading the silence around you, for recognizing the signs of what is already in motion, and for understanding who you actually are in this story. Not who you have felt like, who you actually are. You are also going to receive something at the end of this message, a declaration spoken specifically over you, over your action, over what has been released on your behalf, that I have not put at the beginning, because it has to be earned by everything that comes before it. That is the kind of declaration that actually lands. And that is what you are going to receive today. Stay with me. Everything I am about to show you is worth it. But let us start here, right here, with the one thing most people in this space are not honest about: the waiting. Not just waiting in the general sense. Not the waiting that has a clear end date, that comes with visible progress markers. That gets easier as it goes. I am talking about the specific kind of waiting that you have been in. And there is something about the specific nature of your waiting, the particular texture of it, the particular length of it, that matters more than you might realize right now. I will show you what I mean by that. But first I need to go back to the beginning of the season you have been in. Because most people who have been in a long season of waiting pass through 3 stages. Not everyone recognizes them for what they are while they are in them. But looking back, they are almost always there. The first stage is hopeful waiting. This is where it begins. You received something, a sense of calling, a promise, a direction that felt bigger than where you were currently standing. And the waiting in that early season felt purposeful. It felt like preparation. There was discomfort, yes, but underneath the discomfort, there was breath. There was a sense that something was growing, even if you couldn't see it yet. Hopeful waiting has a particular quality. It feels like early spring. You know something is coming even while the ground still looks bare. You can feel it. And faith in that season doesn't cost you much, because the sense of the promise is still fresh enough to sustain you. The second stage is patient waiting. And this is different. The initial energy has settled. The excitement of the early promise, the freshness, the momentum of a new beginning, all of that has quieted. And what you are left with is something more deliberate, more chosen. You are no longer waiting because it feels good. You are waiting because you have decided it is right. Patient waiting requires something from you that hopeful waiting doesn't. It requires will. It requires decision. It requires getting up in the morning and choosing again to believe something you cannot see. Not because it is easy, because it is true. Patient waiting is deeper and more costly than hopeful waiting. And the people around you who don't understand why you haven't moved on yet, they are looking at you from the outside of a kind of endurance they have never been asked to sustain. And then there is the third stage, the one I want to spend some time with, because this is the one most chosen ones find themselves in before their breakthrough. And it is the most misunderstood stage of the 3, exhausted waiting. This is not the same as giving up. It does not look the same, and it does not feel the same. Exhausted waiting is what happens when you have gone far enough in that turning back. Doesn't feel like a real option anymore, but forward doesn't look clear either. You are not moving toward the promise with energy. You are holding it, barely, maybe, but holding it. And every day that the season does not resolve, the holding gets heavier. Not because you are weak, because what you are carrying is real, and real things have real weight. I want to paint you a picture of what exhausted waiting looks like from the inside, because I think you know this picture, not as a concept, as something you have lived. It is late at night, the house is quiet, everyone else who shares your space is already asleep, or the room is empty, and it is just you and the thoughts that only come when everything else has gone still. You are not in crisis, you are not falling apart, you are just there. And the silence that used to feel like faith, the same silence you used to sit in and feel held by, has started to feel like something different. It has started to feel like the silence of an empty room. Like something is not there that should be. You look at what you have been believing for. You try to hold it the way you used to, and it doesn't feel the same in your hands. Not because you stopped believing, but because you have been holding it for so long that the shape of it has become so familiar it has almost become invisible. You can't remember what it felt like to receive it for the first time. You can't always get back to that place of certainty. And in that quiet, a voice comes. You know the one. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive loud. It arrives in the language of reasonable doubt. And it says things like this: maybe I misheard. Maybe I held on past the point where holding on made sense. Maybe the people who moved on were right, and I am the only one still waiting for something that was never as real as I thought it was. Maybe the door has already closed. Maybe the promise was real, but it wasn't for me. Maybe I got it wrong from the beginning, and I have built too much of my life on something that isn't going to come. I am not going to tell you. That voice doesn't feel real. It does feel real. I am not going to tell you. It is easy to answer it when it shows up at that hour. It isn't easy. What I am going to tell you is this: that voice arrives with the most volume, not when you are furthest from your breakthrough. It arrives when you are closest to it. That is not a hopeful statement I am giving you to make you feel better. That is a pattern, a consistent, documented, repeatable pattern in the lives of people who were genuinely called to something significant. The intensity of the internal resistance is proportional to the significance of what is on the other side of it. You didn't get louder doubt because you were wrong. You got louder doubt because what you were holding was real enough to attract real resistance. Now, here is something I want to point to in your waiting. Something specific, because the waiting you have been in is not generic. There is something about the particular texture of it, the length of it, the cost of it, that is connected directly to what your recent action meant. And I am going to show you that connection. But before I do, I need you to understand one more thing about the exhausted waiting season. Something happens to a person in exhausted waiting that cannot happen any other way. Every borrowed belief, every second-hand faith, every conviction that was never truly tested, it gets stripped away. And what remains after that stripping is the part that is actually yours. The part that nobody gave you and nobody can take, the core. And that core is what your action was built on when you moved. The miracle you have been holding for does not come to convenient believers. It comes to people who held on when holding on cost them something real, and you held on. And then you moved. Now, I want to talk about the move itself, because I think you may be looking at what you did from the inside of how it felt, and the inside of how it felt is only part of the picture. There is something happening on the other side of your action that I need to show you. But before I get there, let me make sure I am talking to you specifically, because chosen ones make their moves in different forms, and I want to account for all of them. For some of you, the move was ending something, a relationship that had run past its season, a pattern of behavior you had been willing to confront for a long time, a way of living that was comfortable but was quietly keeping you from the next chapter of your life. The ending cost you something. It was not clean. It was not easy. But you did it. For some of you, the move was beginning something, a step toward a calling that still felt uncertain, a door you walked through before you felt fully ready, before the outcome was clear, before the right season announced itself with obvious signs. You began before you had guarantees, because something in you said it was time, and you chose to trust that something. For some of you, the move was speaking something out loud that you had only ever held inside. A truth, a need, a prayer that finally moved from the inside to the outside because the weight of keeping it internal had become heavier than the risk of releasing it. You said the thing. You named the thing. You stopped pretending the thing wasn't there. For some, the move was releasing something, letting go of a grip that had been costing you more than the thing you were gripping was worth. releasing a plan, releasing an outcome, releasing the need to control how the answer arrived. And for some of you, the move was simply returning, coming back to faith after a period of distance, stepping back into alignment after a season of pulling away, of skepticism, of needing to protect yourself from hope that had hurt you before. Whatever form it took for you, if something in what I just described landed with weight, that is the move I am talking about. And here is what I need you to understand about it. You saw it from the inside. You saw the fear underneath it. You saw the uncertainty. You saw every reason it might not work. You saw the voices that said, wait longer, or don't risk it, or who are you to think now is the right time? You saw all of that, and you moved anyway. But God did not see it the way you saw it. If you've been listening to this for any amount of time now, I want to acknowledge something. You stayed. That is not a small thing. Most people who started this message have already moved on to something else, but something in you recognized what was being built here. Something in you understood that this message was not an accident. That is not random. That is the discernment of someone who knows the difference between noise and signal. And I am talking to you. You specifically. When God looked at what you did, He did not see a hesitant person making a nervous decision. He did not see the fear underneath the action. He did not evaluate your move based on how confident you felt when you took it, or how smooth the execution was, or how quickly the results showed up in your visible world. God looked at your action and saw something entirely different from what you were looking at. And the gap between what you saw and what heaven recorded is one of the most significant gaps in the story of your life right now. Let me show you that gap through a moment in history, a moment that most people know the surface of, but have never understood the depth of. There was a young man who stood in front of something that had frozen an entire trained army in place. The men around him were experienced. They were warriors. They had looked real danger in the face before, and every single one of them stood back, not because they lacked courage across the board, because they had accurate eyes. They looked at what was in front of them, and the calculation didn't work. The math of what they had against what stood before them simply didn't produce a winning answer. And then this young man walked in. He was not a trained soldier. He came to deliver food for his brothers, and walked into a confrontation that would define not just his life, but the history of a nation. And what everyone watching him saw, what the giant saw, what the soldiers saw, what his own brothers saw, was a boy carrying a sling and a stone. A weapon so ordinary, so visibly insufficient for the scale of what was in front of him, that the man across from him laughed, actually laughed. Because from the outside, the math was even more obviously wrong than it had been for the soldiers who didn't move. But here is what nobody in that field could see. David was not holding a sling. He was holding the accumulated weight of every valley he had walked through before that moment. Every lion he had fought when no one was watching. Every night alone in the field when the only witness to his faithfulness was God. Every season of formation that looked like nothing from the outside, but was building a specific substance inside him. He wasn't standing in that field as a boy who picked up a stone. He was standing in that field as the result of everything he had been built into before the audience ever arrived. The move looked small. The weight behind the move was enormous. And that weight, not the stone, not the sling, the accumulated weight of what had been built in him, is what determined the outcome. That is what I want you to understand about your move. Your action may have looked like one thing on the surface. It may have looked uncertain. It may have looked underpowered for the size of what you are facing. But God did not see the surface. God saw the weight. God saw every season of waiting that went into that move. Every night of exhausted holding on. Every morning you chose to believe again, with no visible reward for choosing it. Every prayer that nobody heard. Every moment you almost let go and didn't. God saw all of that move with you when you took that step. Your action was not an ordinary decision, but what it actually was, what it declared, what it triggered, what it released. That is something I want to show you carefully. Because if I give you the conclusion without the architecture behind it, it will feel like encouragement, and encouragement fades. What I want you to walk away with is understanding. The kind that holds you even in the silence. The kind that doesn't need circumstances to cooperate in order to stay real. And the understanding starts in the next part of this message. Because what made your action carry the weight it carried is directly connected to what happened to you during the waiting. What the wilderness built in you, inside you, in the specific and unrepeatable and non-shortcuttable season you have just come through. That is what comes next. And what comes next changes how you see everything that happened before today. Now we go deeper. There is a reason the wait lasted exactly as long as it did. I know that can be a hard sentence to sit with, because from the inside of the waiting, it didn't feel like reason. It felt like delay. It felt like something went wrong, like a gap in the plan that nobody bothered to explain to you. Like you were doing something right, but the results were on a different schedule than everything you had been told to expect. But I want to show you something that is both spiritually true and psychologically verifiable. Not as a platitude, as a principle. The wait lasted exactly as long as it needed to. Not because God was slow, not because you did something wrong and needed more time to correct it. Not because the timing was arbitrary, but because what was being built in you during that wait required that exact measure of time to reach the necessary depth. There is a distinction that matters here, a distinction most people have never thought through carefully, and it is this. There are two very different kinds of change. The first kind is behavioral. Behavioral change happens relatively quickly. You make a decision, you adjust a pattern, you adopt a new practice. Behavioral change has real value, but it sits on the surface. It doesn't reach the foundational structures of who you are, and when pressure arrives, real and sustained pressure, behavioral change often cannot hold the weight. It is too thin. It was built too fast to go deep enough. The second kind of change is structural, and this is a different thing entirely. Structural change is what happens when the deepest architecture of a person is genuinely transformed. Not how they behave on the surface, but how they process reality, how they respond to uncertainty, how they hold their identity when everything around them is moving. Structural change cannot be rushed. Not because God is being slow, because the nature of what is being built simply requires time. The way a foundation requires time, the way a root system requires time, the way anything real that is meant to hold weight over a long life requires time. What God was doing in you during the wilderness was not behavioral adjustment, it was structural transformation. And I want to show you what that looks like through the life of a man who did not understand it while he was inside it, but who became the clearest example of it that history has ever recorded. His name was Joseph. He was 17 years old when he received something he would later understand as a promise, a dream. Not the ordinary kind, the kind that carries a weight to it that you feel even before you have language for what it means. If you had been standing near him in that moment, you might have felt something in the atmosphere shift. Something was being initiated, something real. And then his brothers threw him in a pit. Not as a metaphor, literally, a hole in the ground. And then they sold him, and he ended up in a foreign country as property, not as a visitor, not as a guest, as property. And he worked his way up, over time, into a position of trust and real responsibility, built something, carried integrity into a context that had no particular reason to reward it. And then he was falsely accused of something he did not do, and he was put into prison. 13 years passed from the promise to the palace, and not 13 years of quiet progress that you could track on a chart. 13 years of circumstances that, if you were watching from the outside, would have looked exactly like a promise that failed, like a calling that didn't land, like someone who had believed something that turned out not to be true. Here is what I need you to see. Joseph did not come out of those 13 years as a slightly improved version of the 17-year-old who received the dream. He came out as a categorically different person. The 17-year-old was genuinely gifted. There was something real there. But he was also naive, in the particular way that gifted people often are before suffering has done its specific work. He did not yet have the capacity to hold what was coming. Not because there was something wrong with him, because capacity of that particular kind cannot be developed any other way than through the exact process he went through. The pit was not a detour. Potiphar's house was not a mistake in the divine schedule. The prison was not evidence that God had forgotten. Each season was doing a specific thing in a specific person for a specific purpose. And when the right moment arrived, when Pharaoh dreamed a dream that his own advisors couldn't interpret, Joseph was not just available. He was the only person in that region who had been built for exactly that moment. The capacity to interpret what no one else could read. The wisdom to steward what would have crushed someone who hadn't been through what he had been through. The emotional steadiness to stand in front of power without losing himself. 13 years made that man. Not 13 months, 13 years. And the miracle of Joseph's life, the thing that makes his story worth sitting with, is not that he endured. Plenty of people endure. The miracle is what the endurance produced. He didn't just survive the wilderness. The wilderness made him into something that the palace needed him to be. That is what was happening to you during the wait. You were not being held back. You were not being overlooked. You were being built, specifically, purposefully, with a precision you could not have designed for yourself, and that no other person in your life could have designed for you either. The wilderness was not wasted time. The wilderness was the necessary construction of something real. Now here is something that nobody likes to say about this kind of building. You cannot see it while it is happening. It does not announce itself. You do not wake up on a random Tuesday in year 3 and feel noticeably more formed than you did a year before. The structural change happens underneath, in the quiet, in exactly the moments that feel the most like nothing is happening at all. And when people on the outside of your season look at you and say you haven't moved, they are only seeing the surface. They are not seeing what has been constructed underneath it. They are not seeing what the years have produced in you that no shortcut can produce. The length of your wait is proportional to the size of what is being prepared. That is not a comfort statement. It is a structural reality. The miracle that is coming requires someone with the capacity to hold it, and the person who has that capacity is who you have been becoming. But there is something more specific I want to show you. Because the wilderness didn't just prepare you in a general sense, it built something particular in you, something that has 4 specific parts. And I want to name those parts carefully, because all 4 of them were present in your recent action. All 4. And that is what gave your move the weight it had. Let me show you the 4 things the wilderness built in you, not as a list to check off, as a portrait of who you have actually become. The first is discernment. And I do not mean this in the soft, loosely used sense. I mean something precise. Discernment is the ability to know something clearly before you can prove it, to perceive what is true before the external world has caught up with the truth. Children often have a version of this. But what the wilderness does is deepen it in a particular way, because when external circumstances are consistently uncertain, when you cannot trust appearances, when the evidence keeps contradicting what you feel is real, you are forced to develop your interior perception beyond what most people ever cultivate. You get better at knowing without seeing, and that is not a small capacity. In a season where what is real is invisible and what is visible is not the whole picture, that capacity is one of the most important things a chosen one can carry. The second is endurance, not in the sense of simply lasting, in the sense of being able to hold weight without losing your essential shape. There is a specific kind of person who can carry something heavy for a long time and not be crushed by it, not be permanently bent by it, not come out the other side broken in the places that matter. That is not a personality trait. That is not something you were born with fully formed. That is something the wilderness constructs over time, through sustained pressure, through seasons that required more from you than you thought you had. You did not arrive at this season as the person who could hold what you have been holding. The wilderness built that person out of who you were when it started. The third is surrender. This is the one that is hardest to understand from the inside, because it can feel like weakness when it is actually the most advanced posture available to a person in formation. Surrender is not giving up. It is not passivity. Surrender is the active, costly, daily decision to hold direction without gripping outcome, to move fully while releasing what the movement produces. That combination, acting fully while releasing fully at the same time, is one of the rarest things in human behavior. Most people either act and grip tightly to the result, or they release and stop acting altogether. What the wilderness teaches, incrementally and irreversibly, is how to do both simultaneously. And that is exactly the quality that was present in your recent move. You moved without putting God on the hook for your specific preferred outcome. You moved in faith, not in demand. The fourth is hunger, and I need to distinguish this from desperation because they are not the same. Desperation wants relief. It will accept a substitute if the substitute removes the discomfort. Desperation is not patient with form. It just wants the pressure to stop. Hunger is different. Hunger wants the real thing, not the version that looks like the real thing from the outside. Not the version that would make the waiting stop, but would leave the promise unfulfilled. The actual thing. And hunger has a quality of patience to it that desperation cannot sustain. What the wilderness does to hunger is purify it. It removes the noise around it, the performance, the desire for approval, the hope that is more about reputation than reality. And what is left after that stripping is something clean. Something that God responds to in a specific and particular way. By the time you made your recent move, the hunger underneath it had been through enough that it was clean, and that mattered. These four things, discernment and endurance and surrender and hunger, they are not gifts that were handed to you at the beginning. They are what the wilderness built. They are what made your action different from an ordinary decision. They are the weight behind the move. And they are all part of who you are now, whether or not you have language for them yet. This is not what a person looks like who has been passed over. This is what a person looks like who has been prepared. And these four qualities, I want you to hold them for a moment. because they are going to connect to something I need to show you later in this message, something about the very specific role these capacities play in the breakthrough that has been released for you. But I want to get there carefully, because there is one more layer of the architecture I need to show you first. There is a principle about the timing of your action that most people never think through. And understanding it is going to shift something significant in how you see not just what you did, but why it happened when it did. The ancient world, particularly the Greek tradition, had two different words for time, not because they were being philosophical for the sake of it, because they recognized something real that a single word for time cannot hold. The first word was chronos. That is sequential time. Clock time, the kind of time you can measure and schedule and count. It moves at a consistent pace. It does not carry meaning in itself. It is simply the passage of moments, one after the other, in a line. The second word was Chairos, and this is an entirely different category. Chairos is not a measurement of time. It is a quality of time. A specific kind of moment that is charged with readiness, significance, and appointment. A Kairos moment is not random. It is a moment that has been prepared for by everything that came before it, and it carries within it a particular potential that no other moment in the sequence carries. God does not operate in Chronos, God operates in Kairos. The wilderness was not God leaving you in Chronos, waiting for the calendar to advance far enough. The wilderness was God simultaneously preparing you and preparing the circumstances of your next season so that when the Kairos moment arrived, everything necessary for the breakthrough would be ready at the same time. The right person meeting the right moment, not by coincidence, by design. Your recent action was your response to a Kairos moment. You may not have had that word for it. Your mind may have simply felt something like now, like a window had opened, like something in you recognized that this was the moment even before you could explain why. That recognition was not imagination. That was your discernment, built and sharpened by the wilderness, perceiving a Kairos moment in real time. You felt the weight of the appointment without necessarily having the theology for it. You did not act because the circumstances finally looked right. The circumstances may not have looked right at all. You acted because something deeper than reasoning recognized the Kairos, and the surrendered, enduring, hungry version of you responded. There is a woman in a story you know whose entire life had been building toward one specific window. Esther. She had been through seasons she did not choose, placed in positions she had not planned, prepared through circumstances that seemed, from the outside, to have no coherent shape. And when the Kairos moment arrived, when the window of significance finally opened, the person who stood in front of it was not the girl who had entered the palace. It was someone who had been constructed by every season that followed her entry, every lesson she had not asked for, every preparation she had not signed up for, every relationship, every constraint, every loss that had built something in her that she was not born with, for such a time as this. That phrase is not about circumstances, it is about identity. It is not saying the circumstances happen to have aligned for you. It is saying that you were not in that position by accident. That the Kairos was yours specifically because the formation had been yours specifically. That you are the person who was built for this moment, not just the person who happened to be present for it. Your recent move was your for such a time as this moment. And the reason it had the weight it had is because of everything the wilderness built in you before you arrived at it. Now, if this were all I had to show you, it would be enough to reframe everything about what you have been through. The waiting is not something that happened to you before your real life began. The waiting is part of your real life. The wilderness is not the gap between the promise and the fulfillment. The wilderness is the preparation that makes the fulfillment possible, that gives you the capacity to hold what is coming without being destroyed by it. That alone would change how you walk forward from today. But I have not shown you the most important part yet. Because what I have shown you so far is what happened in you during the waiting, what the wilderness built, what the Chairos was, what your action was rooted in. What I have not shown you is what happened on the other side of your action, what God saw in what you did, not what you saw, what heaven recorded, and what was released in the specific moment that recording happened. That is Revelation 2. And it is where this message goes next, because what God saw in your action is not what you saw in your action. And the gap between those two things is where everything changes. Earlier in this message, I told you that what you did was not what it looked like. I said that, and then I showed you the formation underneath it, the wilderness, the 4 capacities it built. The Chairos moment your action responded to. All of that is real, and all of that matters, but I have not yet answered the original question. What did it look like from the outside, from where you were standing, and what was it actually underneath the appearance? Those are 2 different questions, and the second one is what Revelation 1 is about. Because here is what most people think happened when they take a step like the one you took. They think they made a decision, a significant one, a costly one, maybe even a courageous one, but a decision. Something in the category of choices that human beings make in the course of navigating their lives. An act of will, a response to a situation. Something that originated in them and produced an outcome in the world. And that description is not wrong, but it is incomplete in a way that changes everything, because what you actually did when you made that move was not just a decision, it was a declaration. And I need to show you the difference between those 2 things, because the difference is not minor. The difference is the reason what you did had the weight it had. A decision is an act of the will. It determines a course of action. It is made with intention, and it has consequences. Decisions matter, but a declaration is something categorically different. A declaration is a statement of reality. It does not just choose a direction. It announces something true. And in the spiritual dimension, a genuine declaration, one made from the deep place rather than the surface, does not just communicate information. It moves things. When a chosen one, who has been through a real wilderness, who has been built by that wilderness, who has arrived at a Chairos moment with the interior architecture that wilderness constructed, when that person moves, the action they take is not just a decision, it is a declaration that lands in a dimension the human eye cannot observe. And what that declaration sets in motion is what I want to show you piece by piece. Think about it this way. Imagine 2 people make the same external action. They both walk through the same door. From the outside, the actions look identical. Same door, same direction, same moment in time. But underneath one of those actions is months of convenient thinking, and underneath the other is years of costly formation, the exhaustion of a long wilderness, the refined hunger that survives everything cheap, the discernment of someone who has learned to hear clearly through sustained uncertainty, the surrender of someone who has genuinely given up the grip on outcome. The external action is the same, but what is behind? The action makes those 2 things almost entirely different things. And the weight of the second action, the spiritual weight of it, is something the first action simply does not carry. Your action was the second kind. And the moment you moved, what heaven recorded was not just a decision. Heaven recorded a declaration. A statement of reality spoken not with words, but with a life, with a choice, with the full weight of everything you had been through up to that moment. And declarations of that kind do not dissolve into the air. They land, they register, and they release a specific response. I want to show you exactly what your action declared, because it did not declare one thing, it declared 5 things simultaneously. And understanding those 5 things is going to show you why the weight of your move was as significant as it was. And I have to stop for a moment. Before I give you the 5 declarations, I want to ask you something directly. In the moment, before you moved, in the specific second or hour or morning when the decision crystallized into action, before the doubt arrived and before the second guessing started, was there a feeling? Not excitement, not confidence, necessarily. Something quieter, something more like a click, like a recognition, like something settling rather than something igniting. If you felt that, I want you to know what that was. That was not wishful thinking. That was your discernment, registering the Chairos. That was the deepest part of you, recognizing that the moment was real. And what followed that recognition, the step you took, was the declaration. Here are the 5 things your action declared, not as a list, as a portrait of what heaven heard. The first declaration was this: I trust the invisible over the visible. Because everything about your season was teaching you to rely on what you could see. The silence was visible. The absence of clear results was visible. The distance between where you were and where the promise pointed was very, very visible. And you moved anyway, not because the visible evidence supported the move, because something invisible carried more weight for you than everything visible put together. That is not a minor posture. That is one of the rarest orientations a human being can arrive at. And when heaven hears it spoken through action, it registers as something specific. The second declaration was this: I am worth the risk. This one is harder to hear than the first, because most chosen ones in a long wilderness have developed a complicated relationship with their own worthiness. The waiting, the delay, the seasons of invisible formation, they can quietly erode the deep sense that you are someone the promise is actually for. And what your action said, underneath everything, was that you believed you were, that you were willing to risk being wrong, because the possibility of being right was worth the exposure. That is not arrogance. That is the specific kind of faith that says the promise is for someone, and I am not going to disqualify myself from being that someone. The third declaration was this: I believe the promise over the circumstance. Your circumstances, at the moment of your action, were not telling the story of breakthrough. If they were, the action wouldn't have required faith. And you moved not because your circumstances confirmed the promise, but because the promise was more real to you than your circumstances. That is a level of conviction that cannot be performed. It can only be arrived at through the kind of sustained formation you have been through. And when an action carries that kind of conviction behind it, the weight is entirely different from an action that simply follows favorable odds. The fourth declaration was this: I release my grip on the outcome. And this is the surrender capacity that the wilderness built, showing up in real time. Because a genuine declaration, one that carries spiritual weight, is not a negotiation. It is not a move made in exchange for a specific result on a specific timeline in a specific form. It is a move made in trust that the one who sees the whole story is more qualified to determine the form of the answer than the one who can only see the chapter they are currently living. What your action said was that you trusted the direction without demanding control over the destination. And that combination is one of the specific things heaven responds to. And the fifth declaration. This is the one I told you I would come back to. This is the one that carries more weight than the other four combined. And it is probably not the one you expected. The fifth declaration was this: I am ready. Now, I need to say this carefully, because readiness is one of the most misunderstood words in the spiritual vocabulary. Most people think readiness is a feeling, a sense of confidence, a moment when the fear is finally gone and the path is finally clear, and everything inside you is saying yes without reservation. And because most people are waiting for that feeling before they move, most people never move, because that feeling almost never arrives on schedule, and it almost never arrives clean. Real readiness is not the absence of fear. Real readiness is the decision that what you are moving toward matters more than what you are leaving behind. It is the interior shift from protecting yourself to pursuing the promise, not because the risk disappears, because the cost of staying has finally exceeded the cost of going. When you moved, your action said, I am ready, in the truest sense of that word, not I feel ready, not everything is in order, not all my doubts have been resolved, but I am ready in the way that the wilderness-formed version of me is ready, which is the only kind of ready that actually qualifies for what is coming. And that declaration, that specific declaration in that specific form, from that specific person, in that specific season, is one of the most powerful things a chosen one can bring to the threshold of their breakthrough. Because heaven is not waiting for the version of you that feels perfectly confident. Heaven has been building the version of you that is genuinely prepared, and those are not the same person. 5 declarations, simultaneously, in a single action, spoken not with your voice but with your life, with your choice, with the full accumulated weight of everything the wilderness had built in you before you arrived at that moment. That is what your action was. Not a decision, a declaration, and declarations of that kind do not land in empty space. Now, I want to show you something about what determines whether a declaration actually carries the weight to move things, because not every declaration is equal. And understanding what gives a declaration its power is going to show you something important about your specific action and why heaven responded to it in the way it did. There are 4 things that multiply the weight of a declaration. Think of them as amplifiers, and the interesting thing about your action is that all 4 of them were present. The first amplifier is the cost of the action. A declaration that costs nothing carries relatively little weight. I am not saying it has no value. I am saying that the deeper and more real the cost, the more weight the declaration carries. And you know better than I do what your action cost you, the peace you gave up, the safety, the comfort of staying in what was known, the approval you may have risked, the certainty you surrendered. Real cost is one of the clearest signals of real faith. And real faith is what heaven responds to. The second amplifier is the context of the declaration. Your action did not happen in a vacuum. It happened at the end of a long formation season. After the wilderness had done its specific work, after the hunger had been refined, and the surrender had been practiced, and the endurance had been built. The context of a wilderness-formed person declaring through a costly action is a different thing entirely from someone making a decision in a favorable season with clear evidence and obvious momentum. The context multiplied the weight. The third amplifier is the absence of certainty, and this is the one that separates declarations of genuine faith from declarations that are really just confident predictions. A declaration made with certainty is not the same as a declaration made without it. When you know the outcome, when the odds are favorable, when the evidence is supporting the move, acting is a reasonable response to information. But when the outcome is genuinely unknown, when the odds are not obviously in your favor, when nothing in the visible world has confirmed that the move is right, and you move anyway, the weight of that action is of an entirely different order. You did not act with certainty, you acted with faith. And the difference between those two things is the difference between a confident prediction and a genuine declaration. The fourth amplifier is the presence of genuine surrender, which means the declaration was not a negotiation. It was not a move made in exchange for a particular outcome on a particular schedule. It was a move made in trust. And the releasing of the outcome, the genuine releasing, not the performance of releasing, but the actual interior posture of it, is what takes an action from a decision into a declaration that heaven responds to as something categorically different. Your action, the specific action you took in this specific season, had all four amplifiers present: the real cost, the wilderness context, the absence of certainty, the genuine surrender, all four. And that is not something that happens by accident. That is the result of everything you went through before you arrived at this moment. So, let me say this clearly. You did not act perfectly. You may have acted with trembling. You may have acted with doubt still present somewhere underneath. You may have acted without any visible confirmation that it was going to work. None of that disqualifies the declaration. God does not grade the emotion underneath the action. God honors the direction of it. And the direction of your action was fully aligned with the deepest things that had been built in you. This is not what a person looks like who is moving out of fear. This is not what a person looks like who acts impulsively without formation behind them. This is what a chosen one looks like at the threshold of their appointed breakthrough: formed, surrendered, ready in the truest sense of the word, moving from the deep place rather than the surface. And now, I want to give you a practical way to sit with this, not as an exercise that requires you to go anywhere or do anything external. Just a way of letting what I am saying actually land instead of just passing through. I want you to ask yourself 3 questions, not out loud, just in the quiet of wherever you are right now. The first question: did what you did cost you something real? Not something convenient, something real. Something that required you to give up a form of safety or comfort or certainty that you genuinely valued. The second question: did you do it anyway? The third question: did you release the outcome? Not perfectly, not without any residual grip at all, but in the interior posture that mattered. Did you act in trust rather than in demand? If your honest answer to those 3 questions is yes, then what I have been describing is not an encouragement I am giving you to make you feel better. It is an accurate description of what your action was. A genuine declaration with amplified weight from a person the wilderness had specifically formed for exactly this threshold. That understanding changes something, doesn't it? Not just what you think about the action, what you think about yourself in this season. Not as someone waiting for something to happen to them, as someone whose action has already set something in motion. Now, that understanding alone would be enough to reframe the last several weeks. What you did, why it carried what it carried, what was behind it. But I have not answered the most important question yet. I have shown you what your action was. I have shown you the 5 declarations embedded in it. I have shown you the 4 amplifiers that multiplied its weight. But I have not shown you what happens on the receiving end of a declaration like that. What God specifically does when heaven receives a declaration of that weight from a chosen one at a Chairos moment. What was the response? What did heaven do with what you declared? That is Revelation 2. And it is where this message goes next. Because what God saw in your action and what God did with what God saw, that is the part that makes the silence you have been living in finally make sense. And not just make sense, point directly to what is coming. There is something I want to be honest about before we go to the next layer of this. I cannot tell you the specific form of your miracle. I cannot tell you the exact date it arrives in the shape you can see and hold. What I can show you is the principle, the pattern, the mechanism that has repeated with enough consistency across enough lives, over enough generations, to be something more than coincidence. What I can show you is how God reads an action like yours and what the reading triggers. Because God does not evaluate actions the way human beings evaluate actions. When you look at what someone does, you tend to read it through the lens of outcome and execution. Did it work? Was it well planned? Was the timing good? Was it done with confidence? Those are the metrics the human perspective naturally reaches for. But God reads actions through an entirely different lens. The question God is reading for is not what the action produced in the external world. The question God is reading is what the action reveals about the internal state of the person. Because internal state, the true interior posture of a person, is what determines readiness for the next season. And readiness for the next season is what God has been building toward in you through every single thing you have been through. Let me show you what this looks like in a story, not the kind of story that sounds good from a distance, the kind that costs something to tell, honestly. There was a woman in ancient history whose name was Hannah. And Hannah had been carrying something for a very long time that the people around her had given up trying to understand. She wanted a child, and she had prayed for a child. And season after season, the prayer had not been answered in the form she was asking for. The people around her had their own interpretations of why. Some of them were not kind in how they expressed those interpretations. Hannah absorbed all of it, and she kept believing, not because it felt easy, because the alternative, which was to stop believing in a God who could answer and settle for a God who was simply distant, was something she could not accept. There came a moment when Hannah went to the place of prayer, and she prayed in a way that she had never prayed before. The Bible describes it in a way that is specific and a little unusual. Her lips were moving, but no sound was coming out. She was praying from a place so deep, so distilled, so stripped of everything performative, that the words couldn't quite make it all the way to audible. What was coming out of her was not a request shaped for an audience. It was the pure, refined, wilderness-formed core of what she actually believed and what she actually needed. A priest who observed her from the outside thought she was intoxicated. He saw the external appearance and drew the wrong conclusion entirely, because what was happening inside Hannah was invisible from the outside. The depth of it, the cost of it, the specific refined quality of it after years of formation, none of that was visible. What was visible looked irregular, strange, even concerning to someone who didn't know what they were seeing. But God was not looking at the external appearance. What God read in Hannah's prayer that day was not its form, not its eloquence, not whether she had found the right words. What God read was the internal state behind the prayer, the specific, refined, wilderness-formed quality of a belief that had survived everything cheap being burned away, the hunger that was clean, the surrender that was genuine, the desperation that had been in the wilderness long enough to stop sounding like desperation and start sounding like the deepest kind of faith. And God responded to what God read. Hannah went home differently than she had arrived. before any external circumstance had changed, before any visible sign had appeared. Something had shifted in her interior, and the shift was real enough to change how she carried herself before anything in her world had changed to justify it. The most effective prayer in all of human history, the one that moves heaven, is not the most beautiful one. It is the most honest one, the most genuine one, the most stripped down and wilderness-refined one. The one that comes from a person who has burned away everything that was not the core. And action is prayer in motion. What you did recently was a form of Hannah's prayer, not spoken with words, spoken with your life, with your direction, with the full weight of your formation behind it. And what God read in that action is not what the people around you saw when you did it. What God read was the internal state behind it. And the internal state behind it was everything the wilderness had built. Right now, as you are hearing this, so are others, not just you. All across this world, chosen ones are making their moves, in different places, in different circumstances, in different forms. And every one of those moves that comes from a genuine place, from a person genuinely formed by a real wilderness, every one of them is being read the same way yours was read, with the same attention, with the same precision, not as group behavior, as individual lives, each one known and each one held. You are not a number in a crowd. You are a specific person with a specific formation who made a specific declaration at a specific Chairos moment. And what God read in that declaration was not a general statement of faith from an unknown believer. It was a specific message from a known and named chosen one who had been through a specific wilderness and arrived at a specific threshold. That is not the same as praying hopefully and waiting to see what happens. That is a declaration that heaven registers with specificity. And here is what I want to tell you about the 3 specific things God saw when heaven read your action. Because it was not a single impression, it was a reading with 3 distinct layers. And all 3 of them together are what determined the nature and the size of what was released in response. The first thing God saw was surrender without passivity. And I want to take a moment here because this combination is genuinely rare. Human beings tend to move in one of 2 directions when facing uncertainty. They either act with a firm grip on the outcome, moving forward, while holding tightly to what the forward movement needs to produce in order to feel worth it. Or they surrender the outcome but stop acting, releasing their grip by releasing the pursuit entirely. What looks like peace is actually withdrawal. What God saw in your action was neither of those. God saw someone who was fully in motion, fully invested in the direction, fully committed to the step, and, at the same time, fully released from the requirement that the outcome arrive in a specific form, on a specific schedule. You released the steering wheel without stopping the car. And that combination, the rarest combination, is one of the most specific things in all of human behavior that God responds to as a declaration of genuine faith. The second thing God saw was identity alignment. And this one requires a bit of explanation because there is a version of you that you currently feel like, and there is a version of you that God has been building toward. And those 2 versions are not always the same, especially in the middle of a long formation season, when the accumulated weight of the waiting has created a certain gap between who you feel like and who you actually are. When you moved, God did not read your action through the lens of who you feel like. God read it through the lens of who you actually are, the version of you that the formation has produced, the one who carries the 4 capacities the wilderness built, The one who arrived at the Chairos moment as a specific person with a specific formation and a specific calling. And what God saw was that your action was consistent with that person. Not with who you were at the beginning of the wilderness, with who you had become by the end of it. God was not looking at the person you feel like in your most exhausted moments. God was looking at the person you have actually become. And those two things are different. And the person you have actually become is exactly who is needed for what is coming next. And the third thing God saw, I have been building toward this one. And I said earlier, it was the hardest to hear. I want to say it carefully. The third thing God saw was that you were exhausted, and you moved anyway. This one I need you to sit with, because I think there is a part of you that believes your exhaustion disqualified something. That if you had moved from a place of full energy and clear confidence and bright faith, the declaration would have carried more weight. That the trembling underneath the action somehow reduced what the action meant. What I want to show you is the opposite. God saw that you were running on close to empty when you moved. God saw the accumulated weight of the long season. God saw what it had cost to hold on past the point where holding on felt reasonable. God saw the specific texture of a faith that has been tested past the point of convenience and is still there, still choosing, still moving, not because it is easy, but because it cannot do otherwise. And the combination of that, depletion, and faithfulness existing at the same time, in the same person, in the same moment, is one of the most powerful things in all of human spiritual experience. Not because weakness is the point, because what it reveals about the source of the faith is the point. When you are full and confident, and everything is going well, and you take a step of faith, the question remains open about what you are actually trusting. Because convenient faith could be, at least in part, confidence in circumstances that happen to be favorable. But when you are empty, when the comfortable motivations have all run out, when there is nothing left that makes this feel easy or natural or strategically sound, and you move anyway, what that reveals is that the source of the movement is not circumstance. It is something underneath circumstance, something that doesn't require favorable conditions to remain real, and that is what God read in your action. God saw three things: surrender without passivity, identity, alignment with the person you have actually become, and exhaustion that didn't stop, all three together in one action. At a Chairos moment, from a chosen one who had been through a real wilderness, that reading produced a specific response, not a general response, not a vague movement, in a positive direction, a specific, targeted, intentional release, the kind that has a name and a direction and a destination. And here is what I want you to understand about the nature of that release, because this is the piece that changes how you understand the silence you have been in since you moved. There was a man in a story, you know, who had been praying about something, praying with genuine faith, with real investment, with the kind of sustained petition that carries weight. And the prayer went unanswered in the visible world. For 21 days, he kept praying. He did not stop. He held the prayer against the silence. And then a messenger arrived, and the messenger said something specific. He said, "From the first day that you set your heart to understand and to humble yourself, your words were heard, and I have come because of your words." From the first day, not from day 21, not when the answer finally became visible. From the first day, from the moment the genuine declaration was made, the response was released. The 21 days between the release and the arrival were not 21 days of God deciding whether to respond. They were 21 days of something real, moving toward this man through terrain that required time to traverse. The response was dispatched from day one. The delivery took time. I want you to hear that in the context of your own situation right now. The miracle is not still waiting to be decided. It is not in a pending state, waiting for additional evidence of your worthiness or your faith or your consistency. What was released at the moment of your declaration has already been released. You are not waiting for God to respond. You are waiting for the delivery to arrive. Not maybe, not contingent on circumstances cooperating. Already dispatched, already in motion, already oriented toward you in a specific and purposeful direction. The silence since your action is not the silence of an empty room. It is the silence of something that is already moving through the space between where it was released and where it will arrive. And the space between those 2 points has always taken time, not because God is slow, because delivery is not the same as release, and release already happened. Now, if I stopped here, if Revelation 2 were the last thing I showed you in this message, you would have something genuinely significant. You would understand what your action was. You would understand the 3 specific things God read in it. You would understand that the response has already been released, and the silence is not absence. That alone is more than most chosen ones carry through a season like this. But I have not shown you the mechanism yet. I have told you that a response was released. I have told you it is already in motion. But how does divine release actually work? What are the specific stages? What does each stage look like from the inside? And where are you right now in the sequence? Because that is the piece that makes everything I have said so far not just meaningful, but actionable. Not just reframing, but something you can navigate with. Something that gives you eyes for what is actually happening around you right now. That is Revelation 3. And Revelation 3 is the most concrete thing I am going to show you in this message. The most specific. The most directly connected to your present moment. That is where we go next. Because the architecture of divine release has a shape. And once you can see the shape, you can read the season you are currently in. And reading the season changes everything about how you walk through it. I want to make sure I am being honest with you about something before we go further. I cannot tell you the specific form of your miracle. I cannot give you a date. I cannot describe exactly what it will look like when it arrives in the shape you can hold in your hands. What I can do, and what I am going to do right now, is show you the principle, the pattern, the consistent, repeatable mechanism that shows up across history, across generations, across traditions, in a form that is too consistent to be coincidence and too specific to be generic. And the starting point of that mechanism is understanding how God reads an action like yours. Because here is what most people assume happens when they take a step of faith and then observe the silence that follows. They assume that God has received the action as a piece of information and is now, somewhere in the spiritual realm, deliberating about what to do with it, weighing it, deciding whether it qualifies, determining whether the person who made the move has earned a response. And the silence, in this frame, represents the waiting period during which the decision is still pending. I want to dismantle that frame, because it is not accurate, and the inaccuracy of it is costing people something real. God does not evaluate actions the way human beings evaluate actions. When you look at what someone does, you naturally read it through the lens of outcome and execution. Did it produce visible results? Was it well-timed? Was it executed with appropriate preparation? Those are the metrics human perception reaches for. But God reads actions through an entirely different lens. The question God is reading for is what the action reveals about the interior state of the person. Because interior state, the true and deepest posture of a person before God, is what determines readiness for the next season. It is the single most important data point in the spiritual evaluation of a life's trajectory. Let me show you what this looks like through a story that most people know the surface of, but have never understood the full depth of. There was a woman whose name was Hannah. She had been carrying something for a long time. She wanted a child, and she had prayed for a child, and the answer had not come in the form she was asking for season after season. The people around her had their own interpretations about why. Some of those interpretations were unkind, some were spoken to her directly. Hannah absorbed all of it, and she kept showing up, not because the showing up was easy, not because each season felt like progress, because the alternative, which was to let go of what she knew to be real, was something she was not able to do. There came a moment when Hannah went to pray in a way that was different from anything she had done before. Her lips were moving, but no sound was coming out. She was praying from a place so stripped down, so distilled, so completely free of anything performative, that the words couldn't quite make it all the way to audible. What was coming out of her was not a prayer shaped for an audience. It was the pure, refined, wilderness-formed core of what she actually believed and what she actually needed. A priest who observed her from the outside drew entirely the wrong conclusion. Because what was happening inside Hannah was not visible from the outside. What was visible looked irregular. What was happening inside was the most legitimate thing a person can bring to God. And God was not looking at the external appearance. What God read in Hannah's prayer was the internal state behind it. The specific quality of a faith that had been through enough that everything cheap had been burned away. The hunger that was clean, the surrender that was not performance. The desperation that had survived long enough to stop sounding like desperation and start sounding like the deepest available truth. And God responded to what God read. The most effective prayer in all of human history is not the most beautifully expressed one. It is the most honest one, the most genuine one, the one that comes from a person who has gone far enough through the wilderness that they have nothing left to hide behind. And action is prayer in motion. What you did recently was a Hannah prayer, spoken not with words but with a choice. And what God read in that choice was not its execution. It was the interior state behind it. Right now, as you are hearing this, the same thing is true all across the world. Chosen ones making their moves. In different places, different circumstances, different seasons, different forms of the same essential declaration. And every one of those declarations that comes from a genuine place, from someone who has been through a real wilderness and arrived at a real Chairos moment, every one of them is being read with the same precision. Not as collective behavior, as individual lives, each one known specifically. You are not a general case. You are a specific person with a specific formation who made a specific declaration. And what God read in your action was not a general statement. It was a specific message from a specific chosen one at a specific threshold. Now I want to show you the 3 specific things God saw when heaven registered your action, because the reading was not a single impression. It was layered, it was precise, and all 3 layers together are what determined the nature and the scope of what was released in response. The first thing God saw was surrender without passivity. I want to take a moment here, because this combination is genuinely rare in human behavior. And I think, once I describe it, you are going to recognize it in yourself in a way that surprises you. When people face genuine uncertainty, they tend to move in one of 2 directions. The first direction is forward motion with a tight grip. They act, they move, they invest, but they are holding on with both hands to what the action needs to produce in order to feel worth it. There is real faith in the direction, but there is also a hidden negotiation about the form of the result. They will go this way as long as the outcome cooperates with what they have in mind. The second direction is release without motion. They genuinely let go. They genuinely surrender the outcome. But what looks like surrender is actually withdrawal. They release the grip by releasing the pursuit. The peace they feel is real, but it comes from disengaging, not from trusting. What God saw in your action was neither of those. God saw someone fully committed to the direction, fully in motion, fully invested in the step, and, at the same time, fully released from the requirement that the outcome arrive in a specific form, at a specific time, in a specific way. You drove the car while releasing the steering wheel. And that combination, full engagement and full trust, existing simultaneously in the same person, in the same moment, is one of the rarest things in human behavior. It cannot be performed. It can only be arrived at through the kind of formation you have been through. And when heaven sees it, it is registered as a declaration of faith at its most mature and most real. The second thing God saw was identity alignment, and this one requires a little unpacking. There is the person you feel like, and there is the person you have actually become. And in the middle of a long formation season, those two versions are often not the same. The exhaustion of the wilderness creates a gap between them. You feel like the person who has been in the waiting, but you are the person the waiting has produced. And those are different people living in the same body at the same time. When you moved, God did not read your action through the lens of who you feel like. God read it through the lens of who you have actually become, the wilderness-formed version of you, the one carrying discernment and endurance and surrender and hunger in their deepest and most refined form. And what God saw was that your action was consistent with that person, not just partially consistent, fully consistent. The action matched the identity of who you have been formed into. And here is why that matters. God has been preparing something that requires a specific person to receive it. Not any person with generally good intentions. A specific person with a specific interior architecture. And what your action declared was that you had become that person, not that you felt like that person, that you had become that person. And the alignment between who you are now and what is coming for you is what makes the release both possible and appropriate. The third thing God saw. I have been building toward this one, and I said it earlier, before I was ready to say all of it. This is the one that is hardest to receive, and also the most important. The third thing God saw was that you were exhausted, genuinely depleted, running on something closer to empty than full, and you moved anyway. Sit with that for just a moment. Because I think there is something in you that has been quietly believing that your exhaustion was a disqualifier. That if you had moved from a place of full confidence and bright faith and clear energy, the declaration would have carried more weight. That the trembling underneath the action somehow reduced what the action said. What I need to show you is that the opposite is true. When you move from a place of full energy and obvious momentum and favorable circumstances, the faith required is real. But the source of the movement remains somewhat ambiguous. It could be faith. It could also be confidence in conditions that happen to be good. It could be momentum that would have produced the same movement in a person with no faith at all. But when you are empty, When you have been carrying this for long enough that the comfortable motivations have run out, when faith doesn't feel like a resource available to you anymore, and you are operating from something underneath faith, something more like an inability to do otherwise, and you move anyway, what that reveals is the bedrock, the thing underneath everything else. The part that does not require favorable conditions to remain real. God saw that bedrock in your action. God saw someone running on the kind of empty where only the genuine thing is left. And what God read in that is one of the clearest and most specific signals that a chosen one can send. Not weakness disguised as faith. Faith operating in its most essential and undiluted form. The combination of depletion and faithfulness at the same time, in the same person, in the same moment, is one of the most powerful things in the spiritual dimension. Because it answers the deepest possible question about where the faith is actually coming from. God saw that, all of it, the exhaustion and the movement through it. And what God saw in that combination was a declaration that could not have come from anything other than the real thing. 3 things: surrender without passivity, identity, alignment with who you have actually become, and exhaustion that didn't stop. All 3 together in one action at a Kairos moment from a chosen one who had been through a real wilderness, and together they produced something specific. Not a general movement of divine goodwill toward you, a specific, targeted, intentional release, already dispatched, already in motion. And here is what I need you to understand about the nature of that release. Because this is the piece that reframes the silence you have been living in since you moved. There was a man in a story, you know, a man who had been praying with genuine faith and real investment about something real. 21 days passed, and the prayer was not answered in any visible way. He kept praying. He held the prayer against the silence without withdrawing. And then something arrived. And what arrived said to him, precisely, from the first day that you set your heart toward this, from the first day that you humbled yourself and turned fully in this direction, your words were heard. And I have come because of your words. From the first day, not from day 21, not from the day the answer became visible, from day 1, from the moment the genuine declaration was registered, the response was released. The 21 days between the release and the arrival were not days of God deciding. They were days of something real, moving through terrain that required time. The response was already dispatched from the moment of the declaration. I want you to hear that in the specific context of your own situation. The miracle is not pending. It is not in a holding pattern, waiting for you to prove something additional. It is not waiting for better circumstances in the visible world to justify its release. What was released at the moment of your declaration has already been released. Already dispatched, already in motion toward you in a specific and purposeful direction. You are not waiting for God to respond. You are waiting for the delivery to arrive. And that is a completely different kind of waiting than what you were in before you moved, before your action. The waiting was the waiting of formation, the waiting of the wilderness. Necessary, purposeful, costly, but oriented toward producing something in you. What you are in right now is entirely different. This is not formation waiting. This is delivery waiting. And delivery waiting has a shape. It has stages. It has specific signs that tell you where in the process you are. The silence, since your action, is not the silence of an empty room. It is the silence of something already moving, already in transit between where it was released and where it will arrive. And the silence of transit sounds exactly like the silence of absence, if you do not know the difference. You now know the difference. But here is the question I haven't answered yet, and it is the one that connects everything I have shown you to your present moment in the most practical and actionable way possible. How does divine release actually work? Not in the abstract sense of God is responding. In the specific sense, what are the stages? What does each stage feel like from the inside? What does it look like in the visible world? And most importantly, where are you right now in the sequence? Because that question has an answer, a specific, concrete, navigable answer, and Revelation 3 is that answer. Everything I have shown you so far, the formation, the declaration, the 5 things your action said, the 4 amplifiers, the 3 things God saw, the dispatch that has already happened, all of it becomes something you can actually walk with when you understand the mechanism, when you can see the shape of the process you are in right now and navigate it with eyes open rather than stumbling through it in the dark. That is what comes next. And what comes next is where this message becomes not just meaningful but practical, not just reframing, but something that changes how you walk through every day between now and when the miracle arrives in the form you can see. Stay with me. We are getting to the most concrete part of everything I want to show you. Here is what I have shown you so far. I have shown you the formation that happened in you during the wilderness, the 4 capacities the waiting built, the Chairos moment your action responded to. I have shown you what your action actually was, not a decision, but a declaration, and the 5 things it simultaneously said to heaven. I have shown you the 3 things God saw in that declaration, and I have shown you that what heaven sees in an action like yours produces a specific response, a dispatched response, already in motion, but I have not shown you the mechanism, the actual shape of how divine release works, the stages it moves through, what each stage looks and feels like from the inside, and most importantly, where you are in that sequence right now. That is what I want to show you now. And I want to be careful here, because this is the part of the message that is most practically useful to you in your present moment. Everything before this has been foundation. What comes now is the map. The release of what God has prepared for a chosen one does not happen all at once. It moves through stages, 4 of them, and each stage has a different texture, a different appearance from the inside, a different set of signals that tell you where you are in the process. Most people do not know this, and because they do not know it, they misread the stages. They interpret stage 2 as absence when it is actually the most active period of the entire process. They prepare to give up exactly when the mechanism is closest to its resolution. I do not want that to happen to you. So, let me name the stages clearly. The first stage is what I have been calling the declaration. This is the moment of your action. The moment a chosen one who has been through a genuine wilderness, who has been built by that wilderness, arrives at a Kairos moment and moves from a deep and genuine place. What happens in that moment is registration. Heaven records the declaration, not as a file stored somewhere, as a response released. The first stage is both the declaration and the response to it, happening essentially simultaneously, because a genuine declaration from a genuinely formed chosen one does not produce a delayed reaction. The response is released at the moment of registration. You have already passed through stage 1. Your declaration was made. The response was released. Stage 1 is complete. The second stage is alignment, and this is where I need to slow down, because this is the stage you are currently in, and this is the stage that is most consistently misread, most consistently mistaken for delay, most consistently abandoned right before it resolves. Alignment is what happens between the release of the miracle and its arrival in the visible world. And here is what makes it so disorienting from the inside. The most significant activity of the entire process is happening during this stage, but it is not happening in the visible dimension. It is happening in the dimension that arranges the visible world. God is, during this stage, reorienting circumstances, redirecting paths, closing certain doors specifically to redirect toward others, bringing people and situations and moments into positions that will serve the delivery of what has been released. All of that is happening, all of it, right now, around you, in ways you cannot directly observe, and from the inside of alignment, it feels like nothing is happening. That is the cruelest feature of this stage, not that it lasts a long time, not that it requires something additional from you, but that its most active period looks from the inside exactly like the silence of an empty room, exactly like nothing is moving, exactly like the declaration you made did not land. I need to stop here. Because this is the part that most people in this space get wrong, and getting it wrong is what causes people to pull back, to reevaluate, to decide they may have misread the Chairos, to start looking for alternative explanations for the silence. And in doing so, they destabilize their alignment at exactly the moment alignment requires the most steadiness from them. The silence of stage 2 is not the silence of divine absence. It is the silence of extraordinary divine activity happening in a frequency that your human senses were not designed to directly perceive. You cannot hear a root system growing underground. You cannot watch a foundation being poured into place. You cannot observe the molecular processes that turn a seed into something bearing fruit. But the silence above ground is not evidence that nothing is happening below it. The silence above ground is what the most significant biological activity in the entire process sounds like from the outside. That is what you are in right now. The above-ground silence of a below-ground process that is moving with a precision and an urgency that you will only fully understand when stage 3 becomes visible. Stage 3 is convergence. This is when the invisible work of alignment begins to surface in the visible world. Not all at once, in pieces, in ways that can seem, at first, almost coincidental. An unexpected connection that makes no immediate sense, but carries a quality of rightness that you recognize. A door that closes with a finality that stings, but points, if you look at the direction it redirected you, toward something better than what was behind it. A moment of unusual clarity. An opportunity that seems to arrive from nowhere. A conversation that shifts something. A circumstance that arranges itself in a way that your own planning could not have produced. These are the signs of convergence. And they are the first visible evidence that what was released in stage 1 has been making its way through the invisible work of stage 2. Stage 3 is not the arrival, but it is the announcement that the arrival is near. And people who know how to read stage 3 can feel the shift before the miracle fully materializes. Stage 4 is arrival. The miracle becomes visible, tangible, present in the form you can hold and point to, and say, "This is what I was built for. This is what I was held in place for. This is what the wilderness was preparing me to receive." Stage 4 is not the end, it is a threshold, because what arrives in stage 4 becomes the foundation for the next season, the next calling, the next level of what God is building in you. Stage 4 is not a destination, it is a door. 4 stages: declaration, alignment, convergence, arrival. And right now, you are in stage 2. The most active stage in heaven, the most disorienting stage on earth. the most commonly abandoned stage in the entire process. And the stage you are in right now, I want to give you something concrete before we go any further, because knowing the name of the stage you are in is not enough. You need to be able to recognize the specific signs that confirm you are in stage 2, and not in a different kind of silence. Not the silence of a missed Chairos. Not the silence of a season that needs something different from you. The specific silence of stage 2. The silence of alignment in motion. There are 3 signs, and I want you to hold them against your experience of the last several weeks as I describe them. The first sign of stage 2 is a sudden clarity about what no longer fits. This can feel like loss when it first arrives. Things that were comfortable, relationships that were familiar, patterns of thought that felt like yours, begin to feel like they belong to a previous version of you, like you are outgrowing them. Not in an arrogant way, in the way that someone who has genuinely been enlarged cannot comfortably fit back into the space they came from. This clarity can be disorienting because it removes some of the scaffolding you were leaning on, but it is one of the most consistent early signals that the alignment of stage 2 is at work. The miracle coming toward you requires you to be standing in a slightly different configuration than you have been in. And the process of clearing what no longer fits is part of preparing that configuration. The second sign of stage 2 is unexpected closed doors. This is the one that is most often misread as rejection. You move towards something and it closes. You pursue an opening and it seals. And, from the inside, closed doors during stage 2 feel exactly like rejection, like the universe is saying no to you specifically. Like the alignment that was supposed to be happening is working against you instead of for you. But here is what I want you to understand about a closed door in stage 2. God closing a door during alignment is not God saying no to you. It is God saying not that way. The destination has not changed. The direction has been refined. The path has been adjusted. And the door that closed, if you follow the direction it pointed you away from, often turns out to be one of the most precisely useful redirections in the entire process. The closed door was not the rejection of the miracle. It was the protection of the path toward it. The third sign of stage 2 is this: unusual peace sitting alongside unusual uncertainty. And this one is the strangest of the 3, because those 2 things should not coexist, and yet in stage 2, they consistently do. You are uncertain, genuinely uncertain. You do not know exactly what is coming, or how it will arrive, or when. The circumstances that would produce certainty are not present. And yet somewhere underneath the uncertainty, there is a quality of quiet that is different from numbness, different from resignation, different from giving up. It is the specific peace of someone who does not know everything but knows the most important thing, who does not have all the answers but has the one answer that holds the others together. If you have felt these things over the last several weeks, in any combination of 2 or 3 of them, I want to say to you clearly, you are not in a delay. You are not in the silence of a missed window. You are in stage 2, and stage 2 is not a waiting room. It is the most active room in the entire process, and you are in the middle of it right now. Let me tell you about a person who was in stage 2 and nearly left before it resolved. She was a teacher, 43 years old. She had spent her entire career helping other people grow, watching the people in her classroom develop and expand and step into things she could only describe as their calling, and all the while feeling something in herself that she could not put language to. Like there was a version of her that she could almost see that was bigger than the life she was currently living, but that she could not quite reach. She described her mind as operating at a fraction of what it was built for, not because she lacked intelligence, because somewhere along the way, the sharpness she remembered from earlier in her life, the speed, the creative leaping from idea to idea, the quality of perception that used to feel almost magical, had gone quiet, and she had gradually, without fully noticing, adjusted her expectations downward to match what was available to her. She had prayed, she had believed, she had taken her own step, her own declaration, and then she had waited in the silence of stage 2 for long enough that she began to seriously consider whether she had been wrong about all of it, not just about the step, about herself, about whether the larger version of her life that she could almost see was something real or something she had invented because the alternative was too small to sustain her. She told someone later that what she experienced in stage 2 was not a crisis of faith in God. It was a crisis of faith in her own perception, because the silence looked identical to absence. And she had no framework for understanding the difference. What changed for her was not a circumstance. What changed was her ability to read stage 2. Once she understood what the silence actually was, once she had language for what was happening underneath the stillness of the visible world, something shifted in how she was able to hold the season. And what followed, in the weeks after that shift, was exactly what I described as stage 3. Small, precise, unmistakable convergences, a conversation, a door that opened from an entirely unexpected direction, a quality of perception returning that she had stopped expecting. And then, stage 4. She said afterward that the most painful part of the whole process was not the wilderness. It was stage 2. Because the wilderness, at least, had a quality of formation to it, a sense that something was being built. Stage 2 looked like nothing, felt like nothing, and was, as it turned out, when everything was happening. I am telling you this because I think part of what you need right now, in this specific stage of your specific journey, is not a new piece of information. It is confirmation that what you are in is real, that you are reading it correctly, and that the silence around you is exactly what it is supposed to sound like at this point in the process. Now, there is something about stage 2 that I have not yet mentioned, something that is particularly relevant to you as a chosen one, specifically, not to every person who takes a step of faith. To people with a specific kind of interior architecture, the kind the wilderness builds, the kind that was present in your action, and it connects to something I want to be honest about. Because stage 2 is, of all the stages, the one that makes the highest demands on your perception. And there is something that determines whether a chosen one in stage 2 can actually read the signals that stage 2 is filled with. Something that determines whether you can notice the convergences as they begin to form. Whether you can see the redirections as redirections rather than rejections. Whether you can feel the peace underneath the uncertainty, or whether the noise of the uncertainty drowns it out entirely. That something is the state of your mind, not your emotional state in the general sense, the literal, neurological state of the instrument you use to perceive everything. Because perception is not a spiritual act operating independently of the physical brain. Perception happens through the brain. And the quality of what you can perceive is directly connected to the frequency at which your brain is operating. Children, in their early years, operate in a frequency that produces a specific quality of perception, a sharpness, a creative immediacy, an intuitive grasp of things that have not yet been explained to them. Adults who have been in periods of deep flow, deep prayer, deep creative immersion report the same quality of experience. Something feels heightened, things connect in ways they could not have planned. Perception feels clean and fast and almost effortless. What science has documented, and what has been documented consistently across multiple research traditions, including work coming out of major universities in the United States, is that this specific quality of perception is associated with a specific brain frequency, a frequency that the human brain produces naturally in its most optimal state, the frequency that is present during genuine insight, during real creative breakthrough, during the moments people describe as synchronicity, the moments when something clicks that should not have clicked yet. And what is also documented is that modern life, the pace and noise and information saturation of how most adults now live, progressively suppresses that frequency. It does not happen all at once. It happens gradually, and the result is a kind of perceptual dulling. Things that should have been noticeable become invisible. Signals that should have been readable become noise. And, for a chosen one, in stage 2, surrounded by exactly the kind of signals that stage 2 produces, a dulled perceptual instrument is a serious problem. Because you cannot act on what you cannot perceive, and you cannot navigate stage 2 with confidence if you cannot read its signs. I want to say something honest about this, because I think there is a part of you that has experienced exactly what I am describing. Not the suppression as a concept, the suppression as a daily reality, the sense that you used to be sharper, that there was a period of your life when things clicked together faster, when ideas came more quickly, when your intuition felt like a reliable instrument, and that at some point, without any single identifiable moment of change, that quality became less accessible, less consistent. You found yourself having to work harder for the clarity that used to arrive almost on its own. That is not aging. That is not a spiritual failure. That is not evidence that the promise is no longer for you. That is what happens to the perceptual instrument when the frequency that produces its best function is chronically suppressed. And the reason this matters specifically for stage 2 is this. Stage 2 is full of signals. Real, precise, meaningful signals that are the beginning of stage 3 becoming visible. But if the instrument you are using to perceive those signals is operating below its designed capacity, you will miss them. Not because they are not there, because the receiver is not tuned to the frequency they are broadcasting on. And then I found something, a study from Princeton, about what scientists call the gamma switch, a natural frequency in the brain that, when active, allows you to perceive exactly the kind of signals that stage 2 is full of, the kind of perception that makes synchronicity legible, the kind of clarity that allows you to read a closed door as a redirection rather than a rejection, the kind of intuitive recognition that tells you this connection matters before you can explain why. I want to tell you more about that, but I need to show you one thing first. Because what comes next in this message is the piece that ties everything together in a way that, without it, everything else I have shown you today would remain information rather than transformation. And there is a difference between those two things, a difference that matters more than I can say in this moment. Let me show you the mega revelation, the thing that changes not just how you understand what happened when you moved, but who you understand yourself to be in this story. Because the 3 revelations I have shown you so far, what your action actually was, what heaven registered, and the mechanism of divine release, all 3 of them are true, and all 3 of them are significant. But there is one more layer underneath all of them, the layer that, when you see it, makes the other 3 suddenly fall into a completely different arrangement. Like a picture that you have been looking at from a few feet away, where you can see the shapes and the colors and the general composition, and then you step back to the right distance, and suddenly the whole image resolves into something you could not have seen up close. That is what comes next. And it is the most important thing I am going to say to you today. You came into this message understanding your situation a certain way. You had made a move. You were in the silence after it, and you were trying to hold on to the belief that the silence was not abandonment, that the waiting after your action was different from the waiting before it, that something had changed, even if nothing in your visible world had confirmed it yet. What I want to show you now does not just confirm that belief, it overturns the entire frame around it. And the overturning is not in the direction of less than you thought, it is in the direction of more, significantly more. Everything I have shown you so far has described you as the person on the receiving end of something, the person God is building and releasing something for, the person whose declaration triggered a divine response, the person whose miracle is already dispatched and on its way. And all of that is true. But here is what that framing does not yet capture. Here is the layer underneath all of it. God had already prepared the miracle before you moved. Sit with that. Don't move past it. God had already prepared what is coming for you before your action triggered it. The preparation was not waiting for your declaration. The miracle was not constructed in response to your step. It was already prepared, already assembled, already positioned before you moved. And this raises a question that changes everything. If the miracle was already prepared, what did your action actually do? Your action was the key. Not a request, not an application, not a petition for something that might be approved or declined. The key. The specific instrument that unlocks what is already positioned and ready. Your action did not convince God to create something. Your action aligned you with what God had already created and was holding in readiness for the specific moment you became the person who could receive it. There is a principle in theology that has been described across different traditions in different language, but with a consistency that points towards something real. The principle that grace, real divine grace, is not reactive. It does not wait for you to act well enough to deserve a response. It goes ahead of you. It prepares what you are going to need before you arrive at the moment of needing it. It positions what is coming for you before you have completed the formation that will allow you to receive it. The miracle is not something you earned by taking the step. The miracle was already prepared. Your step was the turn of the key that unlocked the door between you and what was already there. This changes the question. The question is no longer, will God respond? The question is, are you aligned to receive what has already been released? And that shift, from a frame where you are waiting for God to act, to a frame where God has already acted, and you are the person positioned to receive what was already prepared. That shift is not a minor adjustment. It is a fundamental reorientation of how you understand your own role in this story. Because here is what it means about you. You are not, in this story, someone God is doing something for. You are someone God designed to co-participate in the process. Not as a passive recipient of grace from a distance, as the specific instrument through which the grace that was always there becomes real and present and tangible in the world. Your declaration was not a door you knocked on hoping someone would answer. Your declaration was the turn of a key in a lock that was already positioned for exactly that key, and the door swung open the moment the key turned. There is a word I want to use here, and I want to use it carefully, because it can be misunderstood if it is not held in the right frame. You are an activation key, not in a grandiose sense, not in the sense that you are more important than other people or that your calling is more significant than the calling of someone else. In a specific and sacred and purposeful sense, God has designed the process of release in such a way that your participation, your genuine and wilderness-formed and Chairos responsive action, is the necessary condition for what was already prepared to become accessible. The miracle was prepared, but it required a key. And the key was a specific person at a specific moment with a specific formation responding to a specific Chairos. And that person is you. That formation is yours. That Chairos was yours. And the key turned when you moved. You are not a recipient. You are a co-creator in the divine process. Not in the sense of making something out of nothing, in the sense of being the living instrument through which what God has already made becomes real in the visible world. Your action matters, not because it persuaded God, but because it was the designed mechanism of release. God built the lock. God prepared what was behind the door. And God built you, through everything you have been through, into the key. I want to say something honest here, because I think it matters for how you hold what I just said. I cannot tell you exactly what your miracle looks like. I cannot describe its specific form or give you a date that it becomes visible, or promise you that it will arrive in exactly the configuration you have been picturing. What I can show you is the principle and the pattern and the consistent way this truth has played out across enough lives and enough generations to be something I can speak about with a confidence that is not pretending. What I can tell you is that what was behind that door was prepared for you specifically. It was not generic. It was not a blessing prepared for anyone who happened to turn the right key at the right moment. It was prepared for the person the wilderness was building, and that person is you. Now, there is something I need to come back to, something I mentioned earlier and said I would return to, because it connects directly to what I just showed you. And it connects in a way that is more concrete, more practical, and more immediately relevant to where you are right now in stage 2 than anything else I have said. I mentioned a study from Princeton about what scientists call the gamma switch, and I said I would tell you more about that. This is that moment, because here is what the research has consistently shown. Chosen ones, people with the specific kind of interior architecture the wilderness builds, people who carry deep calling and deep formation and deep sensitivity to things that others miss entirely. These people were born with a version of this brain frequency that was stronger than average. That is not a spiritual claim. That is what the research documents. The heightened intuition, the faster perceptual connections, the quality of insight that feels almost like reception rather than reasoning. That specific perceptual profile is associated with higher baseline gamma activity in the brain. And that is exactly why when modern life suppresses it, chosen ones feel the loss more acutely than most people, because the gap between who they were designed to be and who they currently operate as is larger. The distance between the magical clarity of early life and the dulled uncertainty of the present is not the same distance for everyone. For someone who was born with more of this frequency, its suppression creates a more profound disconnection. And the longing for something that feels unreachable is not imagination. It is the accurate memory of something that was real. And here is why this matters specifically for stage 2. Stage 2 is full of signals. I said that earlier, and I meant it. The redirections, the convergences forming, the unexpected connections beginning to appear, the peace underneath the uncertainty. All of those are real things happening in a real dimension. But they broadcast on a frequency, and the instrument you use to receive them needs to be operating at its designed capacity in order to pick them up. A suppressed gamma frequency is what causes a chosen one in stage 2 to miss their own breakthrough. Not because the signals are not there, because the receiver is not tuned. And this is where something I found changes the picture significantly, not a concept. A specific tool that was developed by someone who spent 34 years studying how the brain moves between states of perception. A neuroscientist named Dr. Robert Lake, whose work drew on research from MIT, Harvard, Stanford, Princeton, and several other institutions, produced something that addresses exactly this problem. Not in theory, in practice, in a specific and replicable and accessible way. What he developed works by using what is called brain entrainment technology. And I want to be precise about what this is, because I think you may have encountered things in this space before that did not produce what they promised. And if you have, I understand why you are cautious. What I want to say is this. Brain entrainment is not the same category of thing as those other things. It is not about belief or intention or sustained practice over months. It is a direct, mechanical interaction with the brain's frequency through sound. The brain, when presented with the right kind of audio input, will naturally synchronize to the frequency that input encodes. It is not a metaphysical process, it is a neurological one, documented, repeatable, and measurable in real time on an EEG. What Dr. Lake built is a 7-minute audio track. You put on headphones, close your eyes, and listen. That is the entire practice. In those 7 minutes, the technology in the audio directly entrains your brain to the gamma frequency, not after weeks of consistent effort, in the session itself. And what this means for a chosen one in stage 2 is specific. It means that the receiver is restored to the frequency it was designed to operate at. The instrument through which you perceive stage 2's signals is brought back to its intended sensitivity. The clarity that the wilderness season has not been able to restore through formation alone, because formation restores interior posture but cannot directly address neurological suppression, becomes available again. The synchronicities become legible, the redirections become readable, the quality of perception that makes stage 2 navigable rather than disorienting returns. Now, I want to say something honest before I go any further. I am not telling you that a 7-minute audio track is the source of your breakthrough. The breakthrough has already been released. What I am telling you is that the instrument through which you perceive the breakthrough as it arrives in stage 2 matters. And this tool was built specifically to restore that instrument. For people exactly like you, this is called the genius song. And what I want to tell you about it, I want to do carefully. Because the way this tool has been used in the lives of people in stage 2 is not primarily a story of dramatic external transformation. It is a story of perception restored, of the signals that were always there becoming readable again. There was a teacher, 43 years old, who had spent her entire career watching other people move into their calling while feeling that something in her own capacity had gone quiet. She did not describe her challenge as a lack of faith. She described it as operating at a fraction of what she was built for. Her mind, which had once moved with a speed and creativity that felt almost effortless, had become slow and foggy, in a way she could not explain and could not fix through effort alone. She found this tool not because she believed in it. She found it because she had tried everything else, and it was the one thing she had not tried. She listened for the first time with expectation close to zero, and a kind of weary openness that comes from someone who has run out of reasons to remain closed. 3 weeks later, she wrote something that has stayed with me. She said she did not know how to explain what had changed, but ideas were arriving again the way they used to. Decisions that she had been unable to make for months came clearly in a single morning. The sense of operating at a fraction of her capacity had not just lessened, it had been replaced by something she could only describe as the feeling of something turning back on. She did not receive a dramatic external miracle in those 3 weeks. What she received was the ability to perceive the signals that Stage 2 had been sending her for months, and from that perception, what came next arrived quickly. 18,366 people have used this tool since Dr. Lake made it available, not because they needed a product, because they were in a season where their perceptual instrument needed to be restored to the frequency it was built for. And what they report consistently is not that the tool produced their breakthrough. It is that it made them capable of reading the stage they were in clearly enough to navigate it. Now, I want to be straightforward with you about something practical, because this is a real tool and it has a real price. And I think the honest thing is to tell you what that context looks like without dressing it up in language that is designed to make you feel more urgency than is appropriate. If you were to pursue gamma restoration through traditional means, through biofeedback therapy with a trained practitioner, you would be looking at approximately $300 per session, a single session. And the home equipment that allows you to do this independently without a practitioner runs in the range of $7,000. That is what professional access to this technology has historically cost. And for most people, those numbers have placed it entirely outside the realm of practical consideration. Dr. Lake made a decision when he developed this tool that I think is worth acknowledging. He made it his purpose to compress the technology into an accessible form, a 7-minute audio track that delivers the same core entrainment function at a fraction of the cost of traditional access. The standard price for what he built is $49. But for the people who are watching this specific message, because he understands who is in this audience and what season they are in, the price is $39. Not $49, $39. And that price does not exist on Amazon. It does not exist on Spotify. It is not available anywhere except through the link I have placed in the description and the pinned comment of this video. That is the only place where the $39 price, the 4 bonus resources, and the complete money-back guarantee are all available together, and the 4 bonuses are not filler. The first is a separate audio track designed specifically for children to support the same frequency restoration in younger minds before suppression has gone deep. The second is the original book that the film The Secret drew its foundational ideas from, which deals with the mechanics of abundance in a more substantive and less abstracted way than the film, valued at $20 on its own. The third is a guided visualization specifically designed for the 4 primary life areas: financial, relational, physical, and purposeful, that helps you form a specific interior picture of what Stage 4 looks like for you. And the fourth is a printed reference that distills 5 of the highest impact daily postures that consistently appear in the lives of people who sustain their breakthrough rather than losing it. I know that $39 is real money. I am not going to tell you it isn't. What I will say is this: compare it honestly against what you have already spent trying to address the fog. A single session with a biofeedback therapist, $300. A weekend immersive retreat, $200 or more. An app you opened a handful of times, recurring charges that added up to more than you realized, and break $39 against 365 days. That is 10 cents a day. For the restoration of the perceptual instrument, through which you navigate the most significant spiritual season of your life. And if you listen and feel nothing, if something in the tool does not serve you, you receive every dollar back, not with conditions, not with a return window that requires you to prove you tried hard enough. The guarantee is complete, and it does not expire. The only risk in trying this is the risk of continuing to navigate stage 2 with a suppressed instrument when you didn't have to. One more thing I need to say. Because there are imitations, there are audio files that carry the name or a version of the name without carrying the technology. They are not the same thing. A file that produces pleasant sound without the embedded entrainment frequency does not do what this tool does. And the only way to ensure that what you receive is the actual tool, the one with the technology, the 4 bonuses, and the full guarantee, is through the link in the description and the pinned comment of this video. Not through a search engine, not through any marketplace, not through any other source that claims to offer it. The link I have placed is the only guaranteed path to the genuine version of this tool. If you feel called to explore this, it is there for you. The link is in the description and the pinned comment below this video. I want you to take it only if it resonates as the right next step for you specifically. Not because I told you to, because something in you recognized it as relevant to exactly where you are. The person you are in the process of becoming, the one who is on the other side of stage 2 and walking in what was released, that person already made this decision, not because the tool is magical, because they understood what stage 2 requires of the receiver, and they gave their instrument what it needed to do its job. And every day that passes in stage 2 with a suppressed gamma frequency is another day of signals missed. Not because the miracle is not moving toward you, because the receiver is not tuned to the frequency it is moving on. The miracle is not waiting. You are the only variable still in play. Now, I want to bring us back to the thread we have been following, because what I just described is a tool, and tools serve the process. The process is what matters. And the process, the mega revelation, the understanding of who you actually are in this story, that is what I want to integrate now. Because knowing what was released, knowing the mechanism, even having the instrument restored to its design sensitivity, none of it is complete without understanding what changes in how you walk through your life from this moment forward. And that integration, that is what I want to close this part of the message with. 3 things change when you receive the mega revelation and really let it land. The first thing that changes is how you read the silence. You no longer read the silence as absence. You read it as the sound of alignment in motion, the sound of what was already prepared, making its way through the invisible dimension toward your visible world. The silence is not empty. The silence is busy. And the knowledge of that, really held, not just heard, but held, changes the quality of how you move through each day of stage 2. The second thing that changes is how you understand your action. You no longer see it as a decision you made and now have to wait to see if it was right. You see it as the turn of a key in a lock that was built specifically for that key. The outcome is not in deliberation. The door opened when the key turned. What is behind the door is already in motion toward you. Your action was not a request. It was an activation. And activations, by their nature, do not require additional proof that they worked. They work at the moment of activation. That already happened. The third thing that changes is how you see yourself. And this is the deepest one. You no longer see yourself as someone waiting for something to happen to you. You see yourself as the specific person who was built for this specific season, who arrived at this specific Chairos, who carried the specific formation, who turned the specific key. not as an ego statement, as a statement of designed identity. You are not in this story as a recipient looking up at the sky, waiting for something to fall. You are in this story as an instrument of specific design, functioning in the specific way you were designed to function, at the specific moment the design called for. That is not who you felt like when this message started, but it is who you have been the whole time. I want to be honest with you one more time before we move into the final parts of this message. I cannot tell you what the specific form of your miracle will be. I cannot tell you when stage 3 begins to become visible enough to point to. I cannot give you a guarantee about the shape or the timing or the configuration of what arrives. What I can tell you is that the process I have described is real. The pattern is consistent. And the person I have been describing, the formation, the declaration, the activation, the specific identity of the chosen one as key rather than recipient, that person is you, not as aspiration, as current reality. What your job is from here is not to make the miracle happen. It has already been released. What your job is from here is to remain aligned, to continue moving in the direction you moved when you took your step, to practice the specific posture of surrender without passivity, to stay perceptive to the signals of stage 3 as they begin to appear, to hold the peace underneath the uncertainty rather than letting the uncertainty drown it out. The miracle may not look exactly like what you have been picturing. That is important to hold loosely. Often what arrives in stage 4 is better than the mental image, not just different, better, more precise, more suited to who you have actually become rather than who you were when you first formed the image of what you were waiting for. Stay open to the form of the delivery, not just the fact of it. What comes next in this message is the integration of all of this into the person you are going to walk out of this season as, the full declaration of identity, the practical postures of someone who knows what stage they are in and who they are within it. And then the closing over your life that this message has been building toward from the very beginning. We are close now, chosen one. Everything I have said so far was the architecture. What comes next is the inhabiting of it. I want to take a moment before we go further and acknowledge something. At the very beginning of this message, I made you a specific promise. I told you that by the time we reached the end, you would understand exactly what was released when you made your move. You would understand the mechanism of how divine release actually works. You would know where you are in that process right now, and you would walk away with a framework for reading your season, for navigating the silence around you, for understanding who you actually are in this story. I have shown you all of those things. But there is one final piece of the promise I have not yet fulfilled, and it is the most important one. I told you that at the end of this message, I would speak a declaration over you, not a generic prayer at the close of a video. A specific, intentional declaration over your action, over what has been released, over who you are in this moment. I told you that had to wait until now, because a declaration lands in prepared ground, and the ground has been prepared. But before the declaration, I need to do one more thing. I need to give you the full picture of who you are, not who you feel like in your most exhausted moments, not who the circumstances of the last season have temporarily made you feel you might be, who you actually are, what you have actually become, what you are actually carrying right now as you stand at the threshold of stage 3. Because the integration of everything I have shown you depends on you understanding this clearly, not as a concept you agree with, as something you genuinely inhabit. At the beginning of this message, before the waiting season had been named, before the 4 capacities had been identified, before the 5 declarations and the 3 things God saw had been laid out. I was talking to someone who had made a move and was living in the silence after it. Someone uncertain whether the move had been heard. Someone carrying the weight of a long formation season and wondering if the carrying was going to mean anything. I want to talk to that same person right now, but from the other end of what we have been through together. You are a chosen one, and I want to be precise about what that means, because it does not mean what many people assume it means when they first hear it. It does not mean you are more important than the person next to you. It does not mean the calling on your life is more significant in some cosmic hierarchy than the calling on anyone else. It does not mean you are exempt from difficulty or pain or the long seasons of formation that every person who carries something real must pass through. What it means is this: you were appointed before the wilderness, before the waiting, before any action you took or failed to take. You were appointed to carry something specific, to be formed by a specific process, and to arrive at a specific threshold at a specific Chairos moment. That appointment was not your achievement, it was your design. And everything you have been through, the formation, the waiting, the exhaustion, the costly holding on, all of it was the natural consequence of being designed for something that required exactly that quality of preparation. You are not a chosen one because you performed well enough in the wilderness. You are a chosen one because you were designed to be one. And the wilderness was the process of that design being realized in your actual interior architecture. The appointment came first, the formation followed, and what came out of the formation is the person who arrived at the Chairos and moved. But I want to go further, because that first layer of identity, chosen one as appointed and formed person, is the foundation. It is not the full picture of who you are right now at this specific threshold. The second layer of your identity is this: you are the one who moves heaven. I want to let that land for a moment before I explain it. This is not a grandiose statement, it is a precise one. What I have shown you today is the mechanism by which a genuine declaration from a genuinely formed person at a genuine Chairos moment triggers a specific and targeted divine response. And what that mechanism reveals is that you, specifically, in this specific season, at this specific threshold, are someone whose action carried enough weight to set something in motion that would not have been set in motion otherwise. Not because you are extraordinary in a way that elevates you above other people, because you are extraordinary in the specific way that your formation was extraordinary. The wilderness that formed you was specific to you. The Chairos that you arrived at was specific to you. And the action you took from the deep place was specific to you. When you moved, something moved in response, not as a vague spiritual metaphor, as a real, specific, targeted, already dispatched release of what had been prepared specifically for you. And the person whose action produced that response is someone who moves heaven. That is not a compliment I am giving you to make you feel better. That is an accurate description of what happened. And the third layer, this is the one that ties all of it together. This is the layer that changes not just how you understand what happened, but how you walk through every day from this moment forward. You are the activation key. Not a recipient. Not someone waiting at a distance for something to fall from above. The specific, designed, wilderness-formed instrument through which what God had already prepared becomes real and present and accessible in the visible world. The miracle was already there, behind the door, waiting. Not in the passive sense of something inert and collecting dust, waiting in the active sense of something fully charged and fully positioned and fully aimed, waiting for the specific person who had been built to turn the specific key. That person is you. That key is your action, and the door already opened. Let me say all three layers together, slowly, because I want you to receive all three at the same time, not as a list of concepts, but as a single portrait of who you actually are. You are a chosen one, appointed before you earned it, formed through what you could not avoid, carrying in your interior architecture the specific capacities that only the specific wilderness you went through could have built. You are the one who moves heaven, whose wilderness formed, Chairos responsive, genuinely surrendered action was weighty enough to trigger a specific divine response, whose declaration did not dissolve into the air, whose step did not land in empty space, whose move was registered specifically in the only dimension where registration actually produces results. And you are the activation key, the person God designed not just to receive what was prepared, but to be the living mechanism through which what was prepared becomes real, not a passive beneficiary of grace, a co-participant in the process of grace becoming tangible, appointed, formed, sent, and now, the door already open behind you. That is who you are, not who you might become if things go well from here. Who you are, now, in this moment, in this season, in the silence, that is not absence, but motion. In the stage 2 that is not delay, but the most active period of the entire process. If you have been here for this entire message, I want to say something to you directly. You did not stay because this was entertaining. You stayed because something in you is being activated, and you know it. Not because I said so, because you felt it. There is something that has been landing across the last, however long you have been listening, that you will not be able to unfeel. That is not my doing. That is what happens when truth lands in prepared ground. The ground you brought into this message, the formation you carried in when you pressed play, is what made it land. That recognition is not random. That is your discernment. The same discernment the wilderness built. The same instrument that turns stage 2 from disorienting silence into navigable territory. You stayed because the deepest part of you recognized that what was being said was real. And that recognition is itself one of the signs of stage 2 beginning to become legible. Now, I want to give you 3 practical postures to carry into everything that happens between today and when stage 4 arrives, because identity without practice is inspiration without traction, and I have not shown you all of this for you to walk away inspired. I want you to walk away equipped. The first posture is this: continue moving, not frantically, not in the anxious way that tries to force stage 3 to arrive faster by generating more and more activity. In the faithful and steady way that says, I moved once from the deep place, and I will keep moving from the deep place, in smaller ways and in larger ones, in the direction the Chairos pointed me. Small, consistent, genuine acts of alignment are what keeps the declaration active. Not because God needs to be reminded that you are serious, because motion is the natural language of someone who genuinely believes that what was released is real. A person who truly believes the door is open does not stand frozen on the threshold. They walk through it. Keep moving. The second posture is to release the timeline, and I want to distinguish this carefully from resignation, because they are not the same thing. Releasing the timeline is not saying it does not matter when the miracle arrives. It is saying that the specific date is God's domain and the alignment is yours. The miracle was prepared specifically for you, which means it was also prepared for the specific version of you that the full process produces. Trying to force stage 3 on your own schedule is trying to receive something in a form that stage 2 has not yet fully prepared you to hold. Trust the timing, not because it is comfortable, but because the God who prepared the miracle also prepared the timing. And the timing, like everything else in this process, is oriented toward your best outcome rather than your fastest outcome. The third posture is to stay perceptive, because stage 3 is beginning, and it does not announce itself with obvious fanfare. It arrives the way I described earlier: small convergences, unexpected connections, doors that close with a finality that redirects rather than rejects, a quality of clarity showing up in specific moments that you were not expecting, the unusual peace holding alongside the unusual uncertainty. I want to give you a practical framework for recognizing a stage 3 signal when it arrives, not as a definitive test, but as a way of orienting your perception. When something unexpected happens, ask yourself 3 things. Does this connection point toward the direction I moved in my declaration? Does this closed door redirect me toward something rather than away from everything? And does something in me, not my reasoning, but something underneath my reasoning, register this as significant? 2 or 3 yes answers does not guarantee that what you are looking at is a stage 3 convergence, but it orients your attention in the right direction. And paying attention in the right direction is not the same as manufacturing meaning. It is the appropriate response of a chosen one in stage 2 who knows what stage 3 looks like and is watching for it with open eyes. Joseph did not know the morning he woke up in the prison that was the day Pharaoh would dream. He did not know that the conversation he had had 2 years earlier with a fellow prisoner would become the chain of events that carried him into the throne room. He had no reason to mark that morning as different from any other morning in a long series of mornings that all looked the same from the inside. What he had was a posture. He had continued moving, doing the work in front of him with the same care and the same integrity that he had brought to every previous season. He had released the timeline, which he had no choice about, but which he had also genuinely surrendered, in a way that kept him functional rather than paralyzed. And he had remained perceptive, which is why when the moment arrived, when the conversation came, when the Chairos opened, he recognized it and moved through it without hesitation. 13 years of preparation, and then a single morning, and Joseph was ready, not because the morning was obviously special, but because every morning before it had been spent in the same 3 postures: moving, releasing, perceiving. That is the practice. It is not complicated. It is not expensive. It does not require a dramatic overhaul of how you live. It requires the daily choice to inhabit these 3 postures in the ordinary moments of ordinary days, so that when the extraordinary moment arrives, you are standing in the right configuration to receive it. And now I want to do something. I want to give you a picture, not a description of a concept, an image, a specific interior image that I want you to carry with you. Close your eyes if you can, or if you are driving or somewhere that requires your eyes to stay open, just let this land in whatever way is available to you right now. I want you to picture a version of yourself, not far from now, not in a distant future that feels theoretical, a version of yourself that has come through the other side of stage 2, that has seen stage 3 arrive and has recognized its signs, that has walked through the door that your action opened and is standing right now on the other side of it. Look at that person, not at what they have or what surrounds them, at who they are. Notice how they carry themselves. There is something in the way they hold their body that is different from how you have been holding yours in this season, not because everything in their world is perfect, because something essential has settled. The weight that was in the waiting is gone, not because they forgot it, because it resolved. It did what it was designed to do, and then it gave way to what was on the other side of it. Look at their face. There is a quality there that you recognize. It is not a stranger's face, it is yours, but with something added. The specific kind of knowing that only comes from having been through what you have been through and having arrived at what that process was always building toward. There is not arrogance in it. There is not relief in the way of someone who narrowly escaped something. There is settledness, the settledness of someone who is standing exactly where they were designed to stand. That person is not a fantasy. That person is not a version of yourself that exists in a reality you have no connection to. That person is you. With the weight of stage 2 lifted and the wisdom of having moved through it intact, the formation does not disappear on the other side of the breakthrough. It becomes the foundation. The wilderness does not get erased when stage 4 arrives. It becomes the ground that the next season stands on. The miracle that is coming for you does not make the journey irrelevant. It vindicates it. It reveals what the journey was always for. And the person standing on the other side of it, carrying the formation and the breakthrough together, more whole than either one would have produced alone, that is who you are becoming. That person made 3 choices that brought them there. They kept moving. They released the timeline. They stayed perceptive. That is the practice. It was enough for Joseph. It was enough for Esther. It is enough for you. Now, I have one more thing to show you before this message reaches its close. And I want to say something about what this closing is, because I think it matters that you understand what you are about to receive. What comes next is not a prayer in the conventional sense. It is not a benediction at the end of a service. It is not a spiritual nicety added to the conclusion of a message to make the ending feel complete. What comes next is the specific, intentional declaration that I told you about at the very beginning of this message. The one I said had to wait until the ground was prepared. In that declaration, I am going to speak specifically over your action, over what was released, over who you are, over what is coming, and over what you are walking into from this day forward. But it will only land the way it is meant to land in someone who has been in this message all the way to this point. Not because I am gating it by performance, because the ground is prepared by the understanding, and the understanding is what everything I have shown you today has been building. If you have been here for all of it, you are not entering the closing as a casual listener. You are entering it as someone who understands what happened when you moved, who knows the mechanism of what has been released, who carries the full picture of who they are. What I am about to speak over you is not empty. It is spoken into a specific person at a specific threshold in a specific season, with a specific awareness of what the wilderness built and what the declaration released and what the activation key has already set in motion. Come into this with everything you have received today, all of it. Don't leave any of it outside the door, because what comes next is the completion of the architecture, and architecture without the final piece is just a structure without a roof. You have been carrying something real for a long time. You moved when it cost you something to move, and what was prepared for you has already been released. Now, receive the declaration that belongs to you. We have arrived, not at an ending, at a threshold, and there is a difference between those two things that I want you to feel before we go any further. An ending is where something stops. A threshold is where something opens, and what is about to happen in this final part of our time together is not a stopping, it is an opening. A specific, intentional, spoken opening over your life, your action, your season, and what is already moving toward you. Before I begin, I want to do something I almost never do at this point in a message. I want to invite you to make a choice, not a complicated one, not one that requires anything of you externally. Just a small interior decision. If you are someone who has been listening to this message with one part of you engaged and another part of you watching from a distance, keeping a kind of careful separation between what is being said and what you are fully willing to receive, I want to invite you, right now, to let that distance close. Not because I am asking you to believe anything you have not earned the right to believe today. You have. Everything I am about to speak over you is grounded in what you have already heard and already understood. But ground does not become foundation until it is actually stood on. And standing on it requires choosing to let it bear your weight. If you are ready to let this land fully, not just pass through, then what comes next will do something real. And if some part of you is not quite there yet, that is also acceptable. Truth does not expire. You can return to this moment. You can let it find you again when the ground is more ready than it is right now. But if you are ready, if what you have heard today has built something in you that is solid enough to stand on, then I want to speak the declaration that this entire message has been building toward. The first thing I want to do is recognize what you have come through, not in the abstract sense of affirming a spiritual journey, in the specific sense of seeing what it actually was. You have been in a long season, a season that was not accidental and was not comfortable and was not the kind of thing that looks like preparation from the inside, even when that is exactly what it was. You carried something real through territory that had no visible markers of progress. You believed things that the circumstances around you did not cooperate with for longer than felt sustainable, and you did not stop. Not out of stubbornness, not out of inability to make a different choice, out of something in you that is deeper than willpower and more persistent than motivation, something that simply would not let go. Even when letting go would have been easier, even when the people around you had stopped expecting you to hold on. That holding on was not nothing. It was not a passive act of survival. It was one of the most costly forms of faithfulness that exists. And I want to say clearly, before anything else is said, that what you carried through the wilderness was seen. Every morning you chose to believe again, with no visible evidence to justify the choosing. Every night you sat with the silence and did not fill it with something false. Every moment of exhausted faithfulness that nobody around you could fully see or fully understand, all of it was seen. All of it mattered. All of it is part of what made your action carry the weight that it carried when you finally moved. You made it through something real, and the making it through is not separate from what is coming. It is the foundation of it. Now I want to speak directly over what was released when you took your step. I want to declare this over you. What was set in motion the moment you moved is real. It is directed. It is specific to you. It is not a general movement of goodwill in your direction. It is a targeted, intentional release of what was prepared for the specific person the wilderness was building. And the person the wilderness was building is you. I cannot tell you the exact form it takes when it arrives in your visible world. I can tell you that its source is not random, its direction is not uncertain, and its destination is not vague. What was released is aimed at you with the precision of someone who knows you completely, who knows what you have been through, who knows what you need, who knows the difference between what you have been asking for and what you actually require. And what is moving toward you carries all of that knowing in the way that only something prepared by that level of knowledge could carry it. You are not waiting for God to decide whether to respond. The response has already been given. You are waiting for what was dispatched to arrive. And the silence between dispatch and arrival is not the silence of uncertainty, it is the silence of something already in motion. Hold that. Let that be as real as anything else in your life right now. Now, I want to speak the declaration of identity over you. The full one, not just a layer of it, all 3 layers together. You are a chosen one, not because you earned it, not because your performance in the wilderness was perfect, not because your faith was always clean, and your doubt was never louder than your believing. You are a chosen one because you were appointed. Before the wilderness started, before the waiting began, before the moment you made your move, you were appointed to carry something specific, to be formed by a specific process, and to arrive at a specific threshold with the interior architecture that only that process could have built. That appointment was not your achievement, it is your identity. And it has been your identity through every season, including the seasons when it felt like nothing you could see confirmed it. You are the one who moves heaven. Your action was not a decision that disappeared into ordinary human consequence. It was a declaration that registered in the only dimension where registration produces results that last. And the response to that declaration, the specific and targeted and already dispatched response, is the evidence of who you actually are in this story. A person whose genuine, wilderness-formed, Chairos responsive, surrender-grounded move carried enough weight to set in motion what was prepared for them. That is not a compliment. That is a description. That is what you are. And you are the activation key. The person who was designed not just to wait for what was prepared, but to be the living mechanism through which what was prepared becomes real in the visible world. God built the lock. God prepared what was behind the door. And God built you, through everything you have been through, into the specific instrument that turns the specific key. You are not a recipient looking up at the sky waiting for something to fall. You are the instrument of release, and the door is already open. You already turned the key. What is behind that door is already in motion toward you. Appointed, formed, moving heaven, the activation key. That is who you are, not who you might become, who you are. Now, I want to speak specifically over the action you took. The move you made was valid. I want to say that clearly, because I think there is a part of you that has been reviewing it, looking at it from different angles, wondering if the timing was right or the form was right or the confidence behind it was sufficient. The doubt that arrived after the action has been whispering questions that the silence has not yet answered, and I want those questions to be answered now. The move you made was valid, not because the outcome has confirmed it yet, not because the circumstances have rearranged themselves visibly yet, because the declaration behind it was genuine. And a genuine declaration from a genuinely formed person at a genuine Kairos moment does not require visible confirmation to be real. It is real at the moment it is made. The validation is built into the declaration itself, not into what follows it. The doubt that came after was not a signal that you were wrong. It was resistance to something real. It was the natural response of everything that fears the breakthrough to the fact of the breakthrough beginning, and it did not stop what was released. Doubt in stage 2 is not a disqualifier. It is evidence that the declaration was significant enough to attract real opposition, and real opposition is not the same as real failure. What you did was heard. What you did was honored. What you did was the turning of the key that opened the door. And the door is open. The doubt does not close it. The silence does not close it. Nothing in your visible world that has not yet confirmed it can close it. The door opened when the key turned. That already happened. Now, I want to speak a blessing over what is coming, and I want to hold this with the honesty that the message has been built on from the beginning. I am not going to describe the specific form of what is coming. I am not going to give you a timeline or paint a picture of specific circumstances that I am not qualified to promise. What I am going to do is bless the reality of what is coming in the specific way that it has been prepared. I bless what is coming for you in the form that God has designed for it to arrive in, not in the exact shape you have been picturing, necessarily, because the shape God has prepared is oriented toward who you are now, the full wilderness formed, Chairos activated, declaration-making person you are now, not just toward what you were asking for when the promise first came. What is coming is more suited to who you have become than what you originally imagined would satisfy what you were waiting for, and that is not a downgrade. That is the precision of a God who sees the whole person and prepares the miracle for that whole person, rather than for the simpler version that first articulated the need. I bless the timing, not because I know the date, but because the same God who prepared the miracle prepared the moment, and the moment, when it arrives, will carry the specific quality of rightness that only a Chairos can carry. You will know it, not because it will feel perfect in every dimension, because something in you will recognize it the same way something in you recognized the Chairos that produced your action. And when you recognize it, you will not hesitate, because what you have been through has built the person who does not hesitate at the threshold of what they were made for. I bless the form of the delivery, even if it looks different from what you have been expecting, even if it arrives through a door you were not watching, even if the shape of it requires a moment of adjustment before you recognize it as what you have been waiting for. Stay open to what arrives, because what was prepared knows you better than the image you formed of what you needed, and it will carry, when it arrives, a quality that makes it unmistakably yours. And now I want to do something that I want to prepare you for before it happens. I am going to ask you to do one thing, not out loud, not out of bed or out of the car, just one small interior movement. And I want you to actually do it, not just hear me describe it. I want you to exhale, right now, a full breath out, not a deep breath in, a release, an exhale. Let something go with it, the grip, the need to know when, the need to know how, the accumulated tightness of someone who has been holding something carefully for a very long time, not releasing the promise, releasing the grip around the promise. Let the open hand be the hand that receives what is already in motion toward it. Breathe out now. That was not nothing. That was alignment, an interior decision expressed through the body, and alignment is what receives what has been dispatched. You did not need to do anything elaborate. You did not need to perform anything. You just needed to open, and you opened. What was released for you is already moving toward that open hand, already in motion, already aimed, already knowing your name. Now, before I let you go from this message, there is one more thing I need to say, and I want to say it differently than I have said anything else today. Not as a teaching, not as a declaration, as something that came to me while I was in this with you. I have been talking about the miracle, the one that was released when you moved, the one that is currently in transit through stage 2, toward the visible form it will take in your life. And everything I have said about it is true. It is real. It is coming. And it is going to be significant in the ways I have described. But I want to tell you something about the miracle that I have not said yet. The miracle is not only what is coming. The miracle is also what you already are. What the wilderness built in you, the discernment, the endurance, the surrender, the hunger, the specific quality of faith that survives everything cheap, being burned away. That is not just the process that led to the miracle. That is the miracle. The person who came out of that wilderness is the miracle, not instead of what is coming externally, in addition to it. And in some ways, more permanently and more deeply than it. Because external breakthroughs come and go. Seasons shift. Circumstances change. What was received can be complicated, used, spent, or lost in the ordinary chaos of a human life. But what was built in you through the wilderness, what the formation produced in your interior architecture, that does not expire. It does not depreciate. It does not get lost in a market shift or a relationship ending or a season changing. What you are now, what you have become, is yours in a way that no external miracle can fully replicate. You came into this season as someone being formed. You are leaving it as someone who is formed. And the miracle of that transformation, the specific, irreversible, no shortcut available transformation of a person through a genuine wilderness, that is a miracle that was happening in you all along. You just could not see it from the inside while it was happening. The miracle that is coming is something you will receive. The miracle you already are is something you will carry. And the second one is what makes the first one sustainable. What makes the breakthrough not just a single moment, but the beginning of a fundamentally different kind of life. So, receive what is coming. Watch for it. Welcome it. Let it be as large as it was prepared to be. And at the same time, look at what you already are, and let that be just as miraculous, because it is. You are, right now, already. One final thing. A blessing that belongs specifically to you. You did not arrive here by accident. Something guided you to this message, at this particular point in your particular season. And that guidance was not random. It was the kind of Chairos-specific, precision-guided, already in motion, quality of direction that Stage 2 produces for chosen ones who are perceptive enough to follow where it points. You followed, you listened, you stayed, and what was spoken over you today was spoken into prepared ground. Go walk in what you now know, chosen one, not with anxiety about the timeline, not with urgency about the form, with the quiet confidence of someone who understands the mechanism, knows the stage, inhabits the identity, and holds the three postures that move a person from Stage 2 to Stage 3, without forcing what only the process can produce. Keep moving. Release the timeline. Stay perceptive. The door is open. What was prepared is already in transit, and what you already are is more than enough to meet what is coming. Now, I want to ask one more thing of you. If something in this message landed for you specifically, if there was a moment in the last however long we have been together where something shifted inside you, something that went from information to recognition, I want to know about it, not so I can track it, but because declaring it out loud is itself an act of alignment. Type the word activated in the comments below this video, not for me, as a declaration from you. A statement to yourself that something was activated in this message, that you received what was prepared for you to receive today, that you are not leaving this the same way you arrived. Activated. Type it if it is true. And if something I mentioned in this message about the specific tool for Stage 2 resonated with you, if the description of the gamma frequency and what its restoration makes possible in a chosen one during Stage 2 felt relevant to where you are, the link to the Genius song is in the description and in the pinned comment below this video. It is there for you if you feel called to it. I am not going to ask you to rush. I am not going to create a pressure that does not belong to this moment. If it is right for you, you will know. And if it is right for you, it will still be there when you are ready. And if someone came to your mind while you were listening today, not a general list of people, one specific person, someone who is in their own stage 2 right now, someone who made their own move and is in the silence after it and does not have language for what the silence actually is, share this message with that one person, not because it will help everyone, because it might be exactly what they need in exactly this moment. And you would know, better than most, what it means to find the right message in the right season. That is all. That is